Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Dedicated Hearts made Fullmetal in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 56, Setting the Stage. Ed sits down onto the bench, a small gap in between both him and Aaron. The two remain silent for a minute as they watched the people in front of them move by. So Ed, how are you? Aaron asked, calm and deadpan. I haven't been gone for too long, but has anything happened recently that I don't know? Ed sighed, no, and honestly I wouldn't know. Ed admitted, I've been here for a while now. Still, you would be getting letter from them, especially from Al. Aaron replied. He turned his head slightly to look at Ed, as if gauging for a reaction. Ed glared at Aaron. Oh, shut up. He muttered. Still not on speaking terms with him. Aaron asked, I'm surprised. I know things have been rough, but I thought you'd both would have moved on from it. I thought you would have loved him and that dash. I know, okay, I'll visit them when this is done. Ed said, I might have been an all-round crap family member to have, but I'll make it up to him. Ed looked away and back to the patients and nurses on the grass. Also, what's with the eye patch? Ed asked, you think it's funny to mock the afflicted? He said almost jokingly. I didn't think about that when losing my eye. Aaron replied. The two chuckled together as Ed shook his head slightly before he became serious again. Ed sighed. Aaron, come home. I can't do that. Aaron replied. Why not? Ed questioned. What the hell do you hope to achieve by doing this, working with Zeke? Let me ask you something, Ed. Aaron countered. That meeting with Kiyomi, she showed us a future which could go one of four ways. 3 scenarios had us at war and 1 at peace. It's clear that Erwin, Pixis, Darius, and the others are all gunning for the obvious scenario, the one you and Alphonse wanted. Aaron said almost accusingly. You could have left Paradise knowing that our future would have been settled. What kind of question is that? Ed said, a bit dumbfounded. We couldn't leave things unfinished. More than that, I think it's because the 3 other scenarios scared you both. You didn't want to leave it to chance, and you didn't want to leave knowing that your legacy might be a sea of blood. Aaron stated. You wanted to be sure that you got the outcome you wanted, even if the chances that Paradise lived for 100 years from now was as likely as the sun rising. Ed turned to look at Aaron, a stern frown on his face. So what? Ed questioned in hushed grumble. I'm not eager to leave this place knowing a world war is on the table. I understand the feeling is what I'm saying. Aaron said as he turned away. We can't be satisfied just knowing that things might be fine, or that if things go wrong Paradise will likely to survive. Walled humanity deserve better than the reassurance that most of us will still be here tomorrow. Aaron looked towards the people wandering around, broken, sad and lost. More than that though, we could do more. What do you mean by more? Ed asked. Aaron looked off onto the grass patch before them, the patients and nurses still occupying the area. The wounded still being cared for and still suffering. Paradise will be free, the island, my home, our friends and family, and the future for those still alive on the island will be there for generations because of what power we have and what we may yet get. We are free. Aaron said in a hushed and thoughtful manner. You and Alphonse always say, alchemy is for the people, for everyone to benefit from. Freedom should be what is also enjoyed by all of Emir's people. And how do you intend on doing that exactly? Ed questioned. You planning on using Zeke and the Colossals to do that, ruin any chance of this being as bloodless as possible? We would need to get Zeke regardless of whether we really trusted him or not. The only path where we possibly win a mass war outright was using the Colossals. Aaron pointed out. Peace or not? That doesn't answer my question. Ed said, you're talking about a lot of lofty goals but not how you're going to do it. I'll tell you what you once told Armin. Aaron said, we'll find a way and win. Ed twitched. How the hell did? You're not the only one with allies, on Paradise, or across the world keeping an eye on things. Aaron replied, using a child to help you unknowingly. I knew you were one for sneaky tactics but didn't think you'd do that. Oh, go fuck yourself. Ed grumbled. What you told us about you trusting Zeke, that's bullshit. You may have changed, Aaron, but one thing I know is that you're still a stubborn bastard. You won't sacrifice Historia. Ed stated. I saw the look on your face. You couldn't accept using her and her children like that. Ironic that you should say this. We could have avoided this if we transferred the female Titan to Historia. Aaron pointed out, of course neither you nor Alphonse would allow that, inflicting a familiar pain to Dash. Shut it. Ed interrupted, he sighed, damn it. I need you to tell me what you're planning. It sounds like you know what I've planned already, so why are you asking me? Aaron asked. I just want to hear from your mouth. Ed said, his tone was stern despite it wavering. I want to know that when we saw those numbers, the millions of people who'd die in any war between us and them, you realized we had to do everything we could to avoid that. I did see it. Aaron replied. He looked back at Ed one more time. But I've also seen a lot of other things which made me sick to my core. The burning hatred that many nations have for us that can never be filled. No matter what we show or have, we can enlighten them, they'll hate our guts. You're talking about it as if it's just going to happen. Ed said. As if war is inevitable. This isn't about whether if it's inevitable or not, Aaron stated, as if speaking about something that he believed was just a fact. If we go to war, it will not be our fault but the fault of the nations that thought they could march over Eldia and not think we wouldn't fight back. I'm just making sure that should that happen, we win. What happened to you? Ed said, his voice sounded disappointed and sad. I got some perspective. Aaron said. Perspective. Ed began to raise his fist. He wanted to knock Aaron out and just drag him away from that bench. Don't try it. Aaron stated, opening the clenched fist resting on his lap to reveal a cut. Unless you're fine having an all-out battle right here in the middle of a hospital. Ed backed off. I'll be sending off one last letter to them today. After that, don't come looking for me again until after the festival. Ed stood up from the bench as the two continued to look at each other. I'll be back for you. Ed said. Aaron's eyes then drifted to the side. Ah, Falco, you're here. Ed turned around to see a young boy, probably about Udo's age, just behind him. Mr. Kruger, sorry if I'm interrupting something, I can come back another time. No, Falco, my friend here is just leaving. Aaron said, raising his hand to his face and itching it, reminding him. TCH. Ed said before walking off. As he walked past the entrance, he looked back to see Falco sitting next to Aaron. Magath knocked on the doors, the echo of the sound reverberating inside. He looked to his sides to see a long line of soldiers dressed in dark blue uniform with two black straps across their body and a white helmet with a spike at the tip on their heads. These aren't Marleyan soldiers. His aide commented, they're the Tiber family guard. There was a click as one of the doors was pulled open. A giant dressed in the uniform of the Tiber stood by. Inside the room, a loud commotion of what sounded to be children inside first welcomed them. Come in. The guard said. Both Magath and his aide stepped inside the room. Before him was a middle-aged man with long blonde hair and light blue eyes, average height, dressed in a smart suit and tie with a rough beard on his face, greeted them. Sorry for the unexpected visit. The man said, hello, I'm Willie, the head of the Tiber family. He extended his hand out towards Magath. Theo Magath, commander of the warrior unit. Magath said, shaking his hand. Nice to meet you, Colonel Magath. Willie said. It's an honor to make your acquaintance. Magath replied. Willie turned to the side, his arm outstretched, and this is the rest of the Tiber family. A middle-aged woman stood formally in front as 5 children either fought on the sofa or helped themselves to the cakes and sweets on the small table as 2 elderly members of the family watched. Magath was almost about to turn away when just behind the family he spotted another individual, a woman dressed in a maid's attire just standing by. Magath, I would like to discuss with you in private. Willie said, his hand leisurely pointing towards the door. Magath turned to his aide, who nodded in response as both Willie and Magath walked towards the balcony door. Willie opened the door and the two of them stepped through onto the balcony overlooking the city of Liberio. Willie leaned forward onto the railing. You've done well with the warrior unit, Colonel Magath. He complimented. It's performed far better than when it was first created. Tell me, have you figured out which one of us possesses the Warhammer Titan? No, I have no clue. Magath replied, this is the first time I've seen the faces of your family. The only time I had ever seen the person who possessed the Warhammer was 4 years ago in your family's only intervention in matters. The Battle of Paradise. Willie Tiber said in hushed tone, yet his disgust was all too clear. A stain on us, to make an intervention for the first time, a participant in a crucial battle no less, and end up losing. We could not have been more embarrassed and ashamed. defeated by the devils of Paradise and their new weapons, the Elrics who claimed to have been sent from God himself. A horrid result which then led to the recent war we endured, which further led to thousands more having to die. Magath replied. It's time like these, we need a hero like Hellos. Willie said as he looked down at the statue at the front of the army HQ. Of course though, the enemy we face is no longer the Eldian Empire who possess the devil of all Earth, but now is supported by the strange sorcerers who can control the elements of Earth to their benefit. It's called alchemy, there's nothing magical about it, it's a science taught and used by humans. Magath pointed out, and it's far more real than the history that the bronze statue there represents. How merciless, Colonel. Willie commented. Tell me, what do you think of Marley's current predicament? He asked. Marley's obsession with war would be disgusting if it weren't frightening given the self-destructive direction this country will be heading. Magath said I would hope that if conscription was introduced that this country's lust for expansion would be stemmed. But, if I could tell the man who governs Marley from the shadows, it would be this: it's already too late to change that. Willie was silent as he looked out. He turned around to face Magath, his back leaning against the railing. You bravely speak your mind, Colonel. Willie remarked. As you might have suspected, the Tiber family controls Marley, but we are not the ones who had forced Marley down this path of war. The role of the Tibers was to watch. Willie explained. We watched from comfort as other Eldians were placed in a cage, and we watched in peace as Marley fell onto a dark and bloody path. Willie paused for a second, but the time for that is now gone. And why now? Magath asked. Why not steers the country's direction years ago? Because Marley's historic enemy, the world's historic enemy, is threatening to rise once more. Willie stated. The Eldian Empire is alive and has the power to rule the world once again in all its tyranny. Are you referring to Paradise controlling the four titans and alchemy? Magath asked. While I am concerned that any war with Paradise would be costly due to those factors, our own standing army outnumbered the last reported population on the island, and coupled with the fact that no nation would ally themselves to the last vestige of the hated Eldian Empire means they aren't certain to win. An astute observation given what you know. Willie commented, but it is only based on what you know and there is much you do not. Paradise is not alone. We have reason to believe that multiple smaller nations have secretly been dealing with Paradise and forming a coalition on the world stage. How do you know this? Magath asked, extremely perplexed. Our spies have seen dealing in the dark with delegates, and informants have leaked to us about Paradise using groups such as the Association to Protect the Subjects of Emir or Eldian Revolutionaries as back channels to send messages. Willie explained as he stared at the ground. He then looked to Magath. Messages that the Tiber family have received. Magath breathed in deeply as he tried to process what he was told. This is a lot to take in. Magath said, trying to maintain his composure. How can there be nations who are willing to work with Paradise? Greed can outweigh hatred. Willie stated, Marley and other superpowers have sought to build their empires and territories through conquest. It was only natural that some smaller nations see opportunity with the devil. The messages you received, what were they? Magath asked. They're strange. It's a mix of different messages. Some of them ask for cooperation and trading, offers of peace. Willie stated, but some of the messages are hostile, denouncing Marley's treatment of Eldians and talking about a coming retribution, calls for war. Sounds like a house divided in Paradise then. Magath commented. But if Paradise, even if it's one side, is offering to talk, then surely we must take it, at the very least use those back channels as a way of meeting with those who seek to defuse any conflict. The problem is we don't know who is the dominant force or the agenda of any possible faction. Willie explained, more than that, if we did entertain the idea of peace we only allow them to grow, using the alchemy and trading their resources and new tech, Marley's hegemony will be destroyed and Eldia will rise from our ashes. Magath sighed. When I first heard of alchemy from Reiner and Berthold, when I learned about the existence of the Elrics, I couldn't believe it as it sounded so fantastical. Magath told Willie, then I heard the stories from Zeke and the weapons they created, then I realized that there wouldn't be a point where both nations meet on equal footing, there was only a tipping point over whether we had the advantage over them or they on us. And if they have alchemy and if they know how to operate the founding titan, then we are completely at their mercy. Willie added to Magatha's thoughts, the Elrics and Eren Yeager have taken a hammer to a piece just past a century years old and may help repeat 1,700 years of history once more. Then what should we do? Magath asked. We have to reveal what we know. Those nations that sully themselves will be exposed and shamed as traitors to the world. Then once Paradis and their allies are isolated, then we will unite the world against the common foe while we still have a chance at beating them. Willie said, we will do this at the coming festival, my hopes will ride on this moment. Willie looked up to Magath and offered out his hand. Marley needs a hellos, Theo Magath, would you do me the honor of shaking this hand? In an office room at the military headquarters of Liberio, Reiner and the other warriors stood by a table covered in files, reports and maps as Magath and other Marley officers listened to Reiner's advice on a possible invasion of the island. Reiner pointed his finger at the southern side of the map, directing the eyes of those around the table. The southern side of the island may be the most fortified as that is where the Titans come from, and since we lost 32 of our ships over the last 4 years, then we should assume that they have made. Reiner mentioned, so it can be assumed that the north will be more sparsely defended than the south, although it will be harder to dock our ships and create a base of operations there. Yes, that all well and good. The officer said dismissively, what we want to know is their alchemy. Is it true that they can just make things out thin air? Everything I said about the Elric's capability of alchemy in the report I had written recently. Reiner replied, I have also written about it a few other times the higher-ups have requested. He said in an empty deadpan tone, I'm sure you can find those reports. We don't have time to read those reports, you wrote it so you should be able to tell us. The officer replied. It sounds like a load of fantasy really, turning objects into different ones by just clapping your hands and touching it. One officer commented, it sounds made it, like something straight from the words and drawings of author writing fiction. Reiner inhaled deeply through her nose. Firstly, their alchemy doesn't make things from thin air. He explained, and secondly, it's not fantasy, it's a science of molding things into something different from my understanding, a science which they learned from their world. You say that, but I've read your report, said there that they claimed to have been sent from God. An officer said in bemused tone. How can you be sure? Because I've seen it with my own eyes and heard them explain it themselves to us before our cover was exposed. Reiner said. So how does their tech development factor into this? Another officer asked. I do not know. Reiner confessed, I am not a scientist or alchemist, nor do I know how technological development can factor into that. He explained, if I had to guess, because it is a science which helps their understanding and development. Already sounds more useful than the power of the Titans. Came an offhand remark by one of the staff taking down notes sitting to the side. How would we go about capturing them? Asked one of the officers. Capturing them is difficult. Reiner replied, while they are human, their use of alchemy makes them opponents almost impossible if you don't have the element of surprise on them, and even then their own resourcefulness, athleticism, and combat experience would make capture for any Marley soldier impossible. He explained, honestly, I would recommend you kill on sight. Reiner looked at Magath, unimpressed at the last comment. Then why don't we just blow their hands off, since that's how they use their alchemy? Asked a different officer. Then that might defeat the purpose of capturing them if they can't demonstrate their alchemy for us to learn it. Reiner stated. They all looked at him disappointed. I'm sorry if that answer is displeasing to you, I am only telling you what I have experienced. No, I understand. Said one of the officers, it was useless to talk to Eldians about a subject like this. He raised his hand, you may leave now. He said, waving them away. Reiner turns to Magath, who shuts his eyes and sighs. I apologize. Reiner said before he walked the door, the other warriors following him out of the room. Porco walks up to the balcony railing and leans against it. Hey, Reiner. He said, getting his attention, I wouldn't take what they said to heart, they are after all a bunch of stable geniuses. Porco didn't smile or express any kind of encouragement to him, but Reiner appreciated it all the same. Thank you. He said. They clearly are a bunch of clever individuals, who else who have thought up the brilliant strategy of sending 4 kids alone on an island with a complex mission? Pike commented. They turned their heads to look down towards the 4 warrior cadets racing each other. Kiyomi sat on a small red cushioned stool as she sipped on some of the Marleyan wine, Around her were her bodyguards and large barrels of red wine stacked upon each other inside the cellar of a safe house within the Marleyan area of Liberio. The cellar was lined with barrels taking up the space while a few gaslight lanterns illuminated the room. She turned her head to the side to see Armin, a young Eldian man and former apprentice to the Elrics, pacing around the room with his head down as if deep in thought about something, with his arms folded and his fingers tapping on his arm. "Nervous are we?" Kiyomi asked. "Yes, I'm sorry Lady Kiyomi." Armin apologized as he stopped to look at her. "Don't apologize, it's only natural to worry about the people you care about," Kiyomi stated. "I know, I am worried about them, it's just there's a lot at stake here," Armin said. "That no one is in doubt about," Kiyomi said as she took another sip. There was a knock on the door which echoed down the staircase and into the cellar. One of the bodyguards walked up the stairs. There was a clicking of metal as locks were turned and a door was opened with a shrill creak. "This way," said the guard. There was a clapping of footsteps onto the cold rock stairs as Edward Elric came into view before them. "Hello Corporal Edward," Kiyomi greeted. "I hope you are doing well. How has your stay in Liberio? Pleasant, I hope." "Yeah, it's been fine," Edward said as he joined the small circle. "Also, you don't have to use my rank, just Edward is fine." "Of course, would you like a seat?" Kiyomi asked. She pointed towards a small stack of chairs to the side. "No thanks, let's make this quick, I still have work that needs to be done," Ed said. "Is this place secure?" Ed asked as he looked around. "Yes, we went over place making sure there wasn't any wires anywhere," one of the guards said. "No one is listening in on us." "Very well, a report on the situation then," Kiyomi said as she leaned back a bit. "Lieutenant Arlert, what have you and your team found out?" "There's a larger network in Liberio than what was anticipated," Armin said. "Aarons isn't just working with a few defectors and insiders from the military," he explained. "If I had to guess, he may be using the existing networks the Scout Regiment helped create over the last 4 years, but we don't know who they are." "Armin, someone was listening in on our conversation," Ed said. Armin snapped his head to him and gasped slightly. "I found Aaron, he was at a psychological hospital going by the name Kruger. I tried to talk him out whatever he was planning," Ed stated, "but he quoted back what I said to him and what I've been doing. He told me that we weren't the only ones with allies keeping an eye on things." Interesting," Kiyomi commented in quizzical tone. Ed turned his head back to her, a cold and stern look on his face. "You got something to say?" "Well, it's just, I could have told you that was going to happen when you and Commander Irwin went around promising resources and technology to other countries and groups, some of whom hate Marley with a passion," Kiyomi stated. "And if we did things like your family had wanted, then Paradis would be isolated and we'd be threatened by the entire world without any way of speaking up," Ed retorted. "But I guess that's what you would have wanted dash." "Ed, stop," Armin said, lifting his hand at him. "Lady Kiyomi, as Irwin, Darius, and Historia has said, the Azumabito and Hizura will always have priority over any future trade deals and teachings of alchemy. That won't change," Armin told her. "We shouldn't argue about the past, the only thing we can do now is keep to the plan." "Well spoken, Lieutenant Arlert," Kiyomi said. "I should tell you what we've heard from our side. You both should know that our informants have been reporting something similar to what you have been saying. The current communications lines have been compromised by those working in it," she explained. "Our attempts at reaching the Marley officials, specifically the Tiber family, are being impeded. They're either throwing them out or someone's killing them." "Did the messages Al and I sent through get to them?" Ed asked. "No, they don't appear to have gotten through," Kiyomi responded. "However, the earlier messages from the Paradis officials have reached them. That much we know until a few months ago, but what could have replaced them now we don't know." "This is awful," Armin commented. "I'm afraid that's not the end of it. From our eyes in other countries, weapons are being smuggled across nations. Most of it is old Marley or other countries, but some of them are Paradis-made weapons," Kiyomi told them. "The parts for those weapons are being brought through your networks." "Where are they going?" Ed asked. "To the internment zones and to some disaffected communities in Marley's colonies. Someone is gearing up for war. They expect uprisings across Marley and other nations," Kiyomi said, "You should also know that it seems that the Tiber family are aware of your international allies. In fact, he's planning on telling the world who they are during his performance at the festival." Both Ed and Armin flinched as Armin gasped, "Oh, how did he find out about you?" "No, they don't know that Hizuru has established relations with Paradise." Kiyomi said, "Our communications are being carried out through my family and our resources, not through the Hizuru Foreign Office." Ed began to squeeze his temples. "Oh my god." He muttered, "This is just getting worse. If things keep going this way, then all the work done to creating a path to peace will be for nothing." Kiyomi finished, "But I guess you can take comfort knowing that your chances of winning a war are more likely than defeat." "That's not good enough," Ed said sternly as he shook his head. "Is this the future we should just accept? Mountains of corpses across the sea just for us to feel safe? No way, we have to stop this. We have to stop whatever Eren and those others are planning. Even if we do stop him, what's stopping the Tibers from declaring war on us?" Armin stated. "That I do not know," Kiyomi said. "However, I do have a message from your commander." She hands Armin a letter. Armin takes a look at the knot as Ed moves in to see. "This is an extraction plan." Armin said, "If we can't get Eren back before the festival starts, then we'll have to enact an attack on the city." The commander talks about some of the details but tells us that all personnel and our allies operating in Liberia will be evacuated, including the defectors. "Did anyone else see this?" Ed asks Kiyomi. She shakes her head gently. "Good." He turned to Armin, who nodded at him before placing the note inside his pocket. "Lady Kiyomi, while we will try our best to make sure this doesn't happen, you and the other delegates from our allies should prepare to leave Liberia should we fail," Armin recommended. "We'll inform you of if we are successful as soon as possible, and if they are using our back channels, then we could send a message to the defectors that way." "Of course, Lieutenant, we wish for your success," Kiyomi replied. She stood up from her seat. "We should get going, wouldn't want things to get too suspicious now." Ed nodded at her before then walking towards a blank wall in the cellar. He clapped his hands together. A blue flicker of electricity flashed and illuminated the wall blue before the walls were pulled back and a tunnel was revealed. "Good luck." "Thank you." Armin and as they walked through the tunnel, the walls closing back up. Udo walked through the familiar street. He searched through the crowd a bit before he spotted a familiar figure wearing a familiar coat waving at him. He smiled before jogging towards him. "Mr. Hohenheim." He yelled out. As he came close to him, he slowed down to a walk. "Udo, how have you been?" Hohenheim said as he put his hand out in front of him. "It's been good, sir," Udo replied as he shook his hand. "It's good to hear," Hohenheim said with a smile. "Come on, let's find something to eat, I'm starving," he remarked as the two walked down the street together. As they walked by, reached a small park and an empty bench facing the small river which passed through the internment zone. "There's a food cart there." They walked up to the cart on large wheels with an umbrella over it. A middle-aged woman was organizing the items in the cart before looking up at them with a smile. "Hello, what can I?" She then spotted that Hohenheim wasn't wearing an armband. She looked confused for a second before gasping slightly and bowing her head. I'm sorry, sir, I should have been more thoughtful." Hohenheim raised his hand up slightly. "No, please don't worry about it," he said, trying to reassure him. "I just want to get some food for me and my friend." "Are you sure? I wouldn't want to dirty your food," the woman said. "I am an Eldian after all." "That doesn't matter to me you're just a person," Hohenheim said. "And I'm going to treat you as such." Udo saw the look on the woman's face. It was the same expression he had when he first met Hohenheim. Confusion. "Seriously, it's fine, they're no trick, this is how I really feel." He gave a light smile while placing a hand on his heart. "Thank you, sir," the woman replied. She looked down in her cart. "What can I get you?" Hohenheim clapped his hands together holding them. "Whatever your speciality is, I'm pretty hungry." He chuckled. "Sure thing, and you, honey?" she said, looking at Udo. "Just a simple sandwich, please," Udo said. "All right, love," the woman said as she rustled through the items in her cart. "Udo, go to that bench, I'll wait here," Hohenheim said. Udo nodded, and quickly walked towards the bench and sat on the bench. He turned his head to see Hohenheim still talking to the woman before she handed him the sandwiches. Hohenheim unclasped his hand and took the sandwiches. Udo blinked a few times. For a split second he thought he saw something flicker, like a spark of light in one hand just flash by. Udo shook his head a bit. I'm seeing things. You all right, Udo? Hohenheim asked as he handed him his food. Yes sir, I just might be tired or something. Udo said as he took it. He looked at the sandwich for a second. He turned to Hohenheim who had already begun eating his food. It's fine. I'm just imagining things. Udo bit into his food. The two talked about their day. Udo told Hohenheim about the race he and his friends had. Despite coming third, he beamed over the fact he almost reached second and how Gabi came second place to Falco for the first time ever. Hohenheim listened to him as they finished their food. We have to serve the delegates coming into the internment zone tomorrow. The festival is going to happen in a few days. Udo said. You excited? Hohenheim asked. It's all to declare war on Paradise. The Tiber family thinks it will unify everyone against threat of the Eldian Empire. Udo said. He slumped slightly. It's too idealistic to think that somehow just having a common enemy will put our problems past us, but we were killing each other just a month ago, and the fact that these delegates are being invited here. My family came from an internment zone in another country, one of the Mid-East nations, and to be invited here is something of a national disgrace. How do you feel about Paradise, those devils on that island? Hohenheim asked. Udo looked up, silent for a few seconds. I can't say I don't hate them. The whole reason the world hates us is because of what the Eldian Empire did. It all stemmed back to them. He said, but the constant use of us as weapons just keeps reminding people of what we can't control, of the thing that people hate us for. I see, I understand your position. Hohenheim replied. What do you think? Udo asked. I'm sure there are bad people there. He said in a low tone, but I'm sure there are good people there too. Everywhere I've gone it's always been that way. He looked at Udo, but I guess we'll never know unless can meet each other. He was silent for a couple seconds. Udo, this might probably be the last time we see each other. After the festival I'm going to leave the city, head back home and see my family soon. Udo felt a small pit in his stomach as his face slumped a bit. I see, thank Mr. Hohenheim for everything. Udo said, you saved me from those people and taught me to keep pushing myself. It really helped me. Hohenheim placed his hand on Udo's head. Take care of yourself, Udo, and please stay safe, will you? Hohenheim removed his hand as he stood up. Don't take it this the wrong way. I hope you don't inherit any of the Titans. You deserve to live a long life. Udo didn't reply. He didn't know what to say. Then thank you, goodbye sir. Udo stood up and offered his hand towards Hohenheim confidently. Hohenheim smiled as he shook Udo's hand. The two then parted ways as Ed walked down one path heading somewhere while Udo left back for home as he thought back to their first meeting up to their last. Thank you sir, I hope I'll see you again. The rest of the day was normal as Udo prepared for tomorrow. He laid out his formal clothes over a chair ready for the banquet tomorrow. His father continued to encourage him while his mother worried over him. He felt excited and nervous for it. It was enough to make him ignore that growing stomachache he had since he got home. Armin walked down the street, a newspaper in front of him as he made his approach towards the hospital. He peered up from the paper and scanned around him. The street was almost empty with just handfuls of people walking around heading back from work as the sun was almost down. He came up to the large walls that surrounded the hospital. He rolled up the newspaper and placed it under his arm. Across the road he saw a group of 4 people dressed in long brown coats look at him. He crossed the road over to them. Lieutenant, is this the place? One of them asked. Yeah, Armin said as he reached into his pocket, pulling out 2 pairs of gloves and placing them on as they approached the entrance. Are the rest of the squad ready? Hang and the others are standing by at the safe house ready to move if anything happens, said one of his subordinates. All right, you all had a look at the hospital outline? Armin asked. They all nodded. Is the tunnel in the basement ready? The others began to reach into their pockets. Yes, Lieutenant. One replied. Good. Armin said as they passed through the wide entrance. 1 person guard the entrance, 2 cover our exit path and 1 person with me, he ordered. 4 minutes, in and out, the space outside the hospital, the grass, was lightly occupied as they walked up to the door and passed through to a hospital's reception, a sterile atmosphere of white floors and walls, Nurses and doctors and wiped surfaces greeted them. "Can I help you?" asked a nurse walking up to them. "We're looking for someone, his name is Kruger," Armin asked. "We're friends of his and we've come to visit." The nurse gave them a perplexed look. "Oh, he has more friends visiting him," she said. "More friends?" Armin asked. "Well, a small group just arrived a few minutes before you," the nurse said. "They said they were here to see Mr. Kruger." Armin felt a chill race down his spine as adrenaline began flood his body. "Move now," he ordered to his team. They pulled out their handguns. Those in the room quickly dropped to the floor or ran out, their bursts of screams and cries as the scouts began to enact the plan. "What floor is he on?" he asked the nurse, who knelt down onto the ground, as calmly as he could. Second floor," she said with her head on the floor and her hands up slightly. Armin and his team rushed towards the entrance to the hallway, one standing by the door with the gun held out pointing to the entrance door, one stood by in the hallway. As they moved up to the staircase, one stood by the stairs as the last one ran with Armin towards the second floor. "Check the rooms," Armin ordered. His subordinate began kicking down doors, pointing their gun inside as they checked. Armin scanned the rooms that lined the hallway, those distressed nurses and patients. "Stay in your rooms," the subordinate yelled as they continued to search. Armin came up to a room at the end of the hallway. He pushed out the door and was greeted to an empty room, a bed stripped bare of its sheets and covers in an open window with a long strand of tied bedding wrapped around the leg of a bed and hanging outside the window. Armin rushed to the window and looked out to an empty street. He looked around. There was a desk next to the door with a single piece of paper and a pen on it. Armin walked up to it. "I'll see you soon." Ed walked through the streets of the internment zone. The streets were beginning to be lined with stalls filled with baskets of food, shelves full of items and wares or carnival games. Those on the street walking by talked to the stall owners, some buying their items and food before they went off on their way. Ed's eyes caught sight of a small stall full of some toys, teddy bears and figures lying on the table with a young man standing behind the stall unpacking the rest of the items. Ed walked up to the stall looking at the toys, wooden soldiers, ships, and cars, stuffed bears and animals and other kid contraptions. Ed stopped looking when his eyes came upon a wooden knight in a full suit of armor. He picked up the toy. "Hey, how much for this?" he asked looking at the stall owner. "Oh, the wooden knight," the young man behind the stall said. "That's 5 Marley mark." Ed reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, taking out a single note and handing it to the owner. "Thank you, sir, have a great night." "You too," Ed said as he looked at the wooden toy knight in his hand before placing it in his pocket. He kept walking down the street, heading into a more residential area full of houses and apartments. The sun began to set and bathe the area in a warm orange as Ed walked up to a door and knocked on it 3 times, looking around the neighborhood, before the door before him and reveal an elderly woman wearing homely clothes with gray hair and wrinkles on their face. "Oh, hello." "Hello, madam. Sorry this is a bit late, but I'm a journalist for a newspaper in Marley and we wanted to ask some questions about him." Ed lied. "We're writing about the warriors of Marley and their work." The old woman looked at him for a few seconds before looking at his arm and the lack of an armband. "Please come in." She opened the door wider, letting him. Edward stepped inside the house. The door led straight into a small hallway and into a kitchen with a simple wooden table and chair at the center, a stove filled with wood with gray tiles on the top and kitchenwares sitting on it. The walls were a dirty white with wooden beams and the floors were a cold gray pattern of large tiles. "Can I?" he asked, pointing his hand to the wooden chair. "Of course. Would you like something to drink?" the woman asked. "No thank you," Ed replied. "I'm sure you'd want me out of your hair quickly, so I'll just ask a couple questions and that's it," he said as he sat down at the table. The woman sat down at the other side. "How was Zeke as a child?" Ed asked. "As a boy, he was always well behaved," the woman said. "We taught him all about the history of our people, the mistakes they made and the crimes they committed. We gave him the best Eldian upbringing that we could." Of course," Ed said as he scribbled this down into a notebook, "but I asked more about how he was as a child." "Oh right, as a child Zeke was." The old woman placed her hands together almost protectively. "He was brave," she said, her voice croaking a bit. "He liked playing with his toys, reading books, and playing catch. "Mrs. Yeager, is there something wrong?" Ed asked as he noticed her eyes welling up slightly. No, it's fine," she said quickly, wiping her eye and putting on a smile. Ed put the notebook away. "Mrs. Yeager, I do know about Zeke's parents and about what had happened." Her face dropped into a frown. "I'm so sorry about your son, and I know you did what you could for your grandson." Mrs. Yeager lowered her head as she shut her eyes. It was a difficult time for us," she said. "We tried so hard to bring them up properly. We tried to make sure that Grisha knew about what was right and proper, but we didn't think he and Dina would do that, that they were be." Ed placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to reassure her. "It's all right, I believe you, and parents, a lot of them always try to do right to their children." "Thank you, it's just..." She lifted up her head, tears running down her face. "My poor Zeke, his father and mother was the one who made him join the warriors. I should be proud, but I want him to live a long life and have children of his own. My son." He tried to fill his head full of ideas about revenge and restoring the Eldian Empire, just a boy being used like that. "I understand," Ed said softly. "Grisha and Dina tried to get him involved in their whole plan and tried to get into the army, using their own son. Zeke hated having to do it." "What do you mean?" Ed asked. "A mother can tell, and so can a grandmother. The boy hated being a warrior cadet when he first started. I could see the bruises and the scabs that the training left on his body when I bathed him." Mrs. Yeager told. "Is it any wonder why he told on his parents, who put him through such a thing? And if he hadn't, then we'd all be sent to paradise and turned into titans. But what had happened, all of it, it still hurts. My husband, we had to place him in a hospital because he couldn't cope with the pain." She began to sob. "I understand, it must have been a horrible choice for him to make," Ed said, as he looked at the old woman before her as she retold this story. He really couldn't help but feel sorry for her, even if he had nothing but a deep hatred and suspicion of her grandson. "Mrs. Yeager, I'm sorry I made you go through that. I'll be leaving." He got up from the chair. "It's fine," she replied as she did the same, wiping away her tears as she walked up to the door with him. "I'm sorry for being so emotional." "Please, you shouldn't apologize for that," he said. "Please take care of yourself." Ed walked out of the door, giving her a polite wave before she closed it. Ed turned away and began to walk away from the door. Just as he left the path to her house, he turned around towards the main road. He froze in place, his breath caught in his throat and his body tensing as he looked upon a horribly familiar person just a meter away from him with a cigarette in their mouth. "You and your brother will die in this world too, Ed. You'll have come here for nothing." "Hello there, didn't expect to see you," Zeke said. He took the cigarette from his mouth. "Shut it," Ed interrupted him. "Visiting my dear grandmother's house, you didn't." Zeke's word trailed off. Ed looked at him confused for a second before he scowled at him as if disgusted by the suggestion. "No," Ed replied, "I'm not a monster." "True, you and your brother seem to keep to a high moral standard," Zeke remarked, "though I'm sure that doesn't stop you from wanting to kill me." Ed walked up to him. Even if Zeke was a few inches taller than him, Ed still scared him as Zeke stepped back as he walked forward. "Maybe, but that won't stop me from doing it if you try anything to hurt us." Ed walked past Zeke, bumping his arm into him and pushing him to the side a bit. "But," Zeke said, still mad about what happened, he remarked, "I can understand. I'll see you soon." Von Hohenheim. Aaron hobbled through the tunnels of the underground complex. The walls of the hallway were very familiar to him, with its dirt and rock walls held only by wooden beams. The hallway was ill-lit with candles dotted around to illuminate the path. To the side of each was a man or woman dressed in plain clothes holding a rifle. So Marlian made and some Paradis said looked at each person as they bowed their head at him. On each of them was a pin over their heart, a tree with 8 branches leading into the trunk of the tree. He came onto an opening at the side guarded by 2 people. As he approached them, they placed a clenched fist over their chest as he walked past them and into the room. Inside were a row of benches filled with others who quickly fell into silence as he walked inside. Those sitting on the benches were people dressed in plain clothes with a pin over the left side. They were of different ages. Some were middle-aged or had graying hair, and some were just children, possibly young teenagers like he was when he joined the Scouts. The room was brightly lit with lanterns around. Aaron hobbled into the room on his crutches as those on the rows of benches watched him. He looked at their faces filled with wonder and anticipation as he stopped at the front and stood in front of them next to 2 hooded figures. Louise, whim. Aaron said to the hooded figures. They lowered their hoods to reveal both a man and a woman. Both were young, maybe even younger than Aaron. The woman had shoulder-length blonde hair and large eyes on a round face, while the man had dark hair in a short crew cut in a rectangular-shaped face. "Were you successful?" "Everything is in place," Louise said. "Nothing will stop this." "Aaron, we got a message from Armin." He handed Aaron a letter. "It looks like they're aware of how we've been operating so far." Aaron opened the letter and read through it. "Commander Irwin is organizing our evacuation for the city. A trip back home is coming, all of us." The room was filled with smiles and cheers at the news. Aaron waited for the room to quieten down as they took their seats and settled down. "The dream we shared by those before us and our children, will happen," he declared with a clenched fist placed over his heart. "The sun will never set on what we will create. We will all be free by guns, by titans, or by alchemy. Our people across the world will be free," he said. "For the world we create, we will never let go." Chapter 57, Devil's Appearance. Armin walked up towards the large metal gates of the internment zone, lugging around two large black cases. Crowds of people passed through the gates as they were inspected by the Marley public security officers. Everyone who passed through was carrying cases, suitcases, and trolleys, all of whom weren't wearing any armbands and came from all over the world. "You go through," said one of the guards as they waved away a man carrying crates. He turned to Armin. "You there, you have your papers." Armin reached in pocket and pulled out some papers. The guard to it and quickly scanned through it. "Musician groups. They forgot some of their equipment, so I went to get it for them," Armin said. "Just a few instruments," he tried to assure them. "Oh yeah, let me see," the guard asked, looking at the case. "Sure thing." Armin complied. He lowered one of the cases and opened one of them. Inside were two gray trumpets and metal harmonicas inside a case covered with white cloth. "Same thing in the other case." Armin nodded his head. "All right then, you go through," he said, waving him in uncaringly. "Thank you," Armin replied as he walked into the internment zone. Passing through, he couldn't help but think of home. "I guess the MPs and the public security here have something in common." He walked away from the crowd and down one of the streets. Everywhere seemed to be crowded full of people, vendors, and visitors. The smell of food was ever present in the air, and the sound of music, chatter, and laugh had occupied his ears. All while the sun began to set and bathe everything in a deep orange. Armin looked to the sky and the lowering sun, a ever-present feeling of anxiety and dread in his body and swirling around his mind, like knowing a massive storm was going to hit, like sand flowing to the bottom of an hourglass. But this had just a small chance of being prevented. He walked towards a small building with the words, "The Furbergen," the hotel Ed was staying at. He walked through the doors into a very homely lobby area filled with more people. His eyes scanned the area until they came upon a familiar person with an eye patch sitting on a chair. "Hohenheim," Armin called out, getting Ed's attention. Ed stood up and greeted him. "Hey, how have you been?" he asked with a performed smile. Good, I've got the instruments for the band," Armin said, showing him the cases. "Right, sorry I forgot them. Come on, let's take a look at them," Ed said, waving him forward as they walked up the staircase, into the hallway and towards Ed's room. As Armin entered the room, he dropped the cases onto the bed as Ed closed the door. "You get past the guards all right?" Ed asked. "Yeah, the instruments threw them off," Armin replied as he opened the cases, showing the trumpet and harmonica. He took the instruments out and placed them down before lifting the covering of one case to reveal 4 thin barrels of gas underneath and a handgun. Armin lifted the cover for the other case to bring out 2 thin scarabs with 2 thin titanium blades. Armin couldn't help but look at the ODM gear. Its now thin and sleek design was a far cry from the clunky and weighted weapons of the past. "You use the tunnels?" Ed asked. "No, couldn't risk it, wouldn't want the path to be compromised before we ever got the chance to use it," Armin replied. Ed clapped his hands together. There was a familiar echo and blue flashes of light before he grabbed the instruments on the bed. They broken apart and formed into the different pieces of the ODM gear. "What's the plan again?" Ed asked as he began to put the gear together. "Evacuation mission from Liberio," Armin took at the seat from the desk and sat down. 2 squads are to set up a beachhead about 20 miles from the docks. My team and I have already set up the tunnels from inside the internment zone into a nearby abandoned warehouse and around the port. Armin explained, the commander has also ordered the capture of as many of the shifters we can get. Going for the whole thing, Ed remarked as he continued to put the pieces together. Commander Irwin wants to remove the one thing Marley has, hopefully forcing them into early talks, even if they still declare war. Armin stated. Probably the best move. Ed replied as he began to put together the wires and the handles. What's my job? You need to secure Aaron. Armin said we know he's planning something, possibly a response to the declaration, but it might be assumed that those following him will act on his signal. Just stopping him might be enough, though you should time your search after the shifters are captured. Yelena will help apprehend them, they'll be sitting near the front row. What happens if I find him? Ed asked, turning to face Armin. Wait for the festival to die down. If you're outside, then use the flare gun, and if you're in a building, then place this down before going in. He wanted him what felt like rock wrapped tightly in a thick cloth similar to a present. Is this plan for if I get to Aaron first? Ed asked. What if I can't find him and he goes ahead? The objectives stay the same even if Aaron goes ahead with his plan. Armin stated, only difference is everything just gets harder and we go into combat rather than a more covered operation. Squads Hang and Nanaba will be assigned to intercept any reinforcements heading towards the internment zone. The less Marley forces heading to the internment zone means our path won't be compromised. Armin explained, there'll be a fight inside the internment zone as all other squads try to cover the escape, and capturing the Titan shifters, if they hadn't been previously secured, will be a lot more difficult. Armin was silent for a few seconds, a somber realization dawning on them. The collateral damage will be massive and a lot of people will die. Ed looked at his handgun. You know, before I came here I never once shot a gun. Ed said, I've been shot at, wrestled, stabbed and beaten down, all by people and the homunculi. Not once did I ever shoot them, and I had the opportunity to do so. He gripped the gun. Now, I've not only shot a gun, I know I've killed that person. He placed the handgun in its holster. I've killed too many people, Titans, and humans, and then there's the weapons we helped create. He turned to Armin. I don't know if I can really forgive myself for doing that, breaking that principle, but I guess the only thing we can do now is just stop the bleeding. Armin looked down to the floor. I think we will all have a hard time trying to forgive ourselves when all is said and done. Is Alphonse with them? Ed asked, trying to change the subject. They're all involved. Armin replied, Irwin needs Alphonse and the battalion to help with our escape. A good number of them are needed. That includes the new batch, each assigned to different squads. Ed raised his eyebrow slightly. The new recruits? He asked. They're sending them here too? Those guys are still learning, they haven't gone through any of the training yet. Which is why they're coming too. The commander believes this will be a good way to blood them into the regiment and give them combat experience if things do turn bad. Armin explained. Alphonse gave his approval, though knowing him he was likely very reluctant to do so. There's a lot riding on me getting this right then. Ed said with an exhausted smile. I know. Armin said as he stood up. There's also another objective to your mission. Do not let Willie Tiber get killed. He's going to declare war on us. Ed said sadly. And he'll be the one to call it off if we get him on our side. Armin told him, he's still the most influential Eldian alive at the moment. If we have even a shot at continuing the current paths, then Irwin needs to meet and convince him, and that's only possible as if he stays alive. He walked towards the door. Armin turned back to face Ed. Good luck, he said before leaving the room and shutting the door. Ed straps on the ODM gear, tightening the loose straps around his waist and his body. He taps on the canister and the metal scarab. He pulls out his handles from his side, inspecting them one last time. He breathes in deeply before exhaling the air loudly. He walks up to the window of his hotel room and pushes it open. He sticks his head out to look. The streets are almost empty, with only a few people left heading towards the internment zone center. The big moment was almost here. He placed on thin coat, covering his gear, before he climbs up onto the windowsill and sits out with legs dangling inside as he aims his handles upwards towards the roof of building. He leaned back and fired the hooks from his waist and onto the roof as he swings out of the window and onto the wall, walking upwards carefully and quickly to avoid the windows around him. He climbed up onto the roof, pulling himself from the ledge and onto the flat surface. On the roof he could barely make out the noise and the lights from the main event, the play taking place over the buildings in front of him just blocking his view. Ed fired his hooks onto a nearby building and quickly swung himself over, jumping from building to building as the lights grew brighter and the sound grew louder. He arrived just a few streets away from the last row of houses and buildings which the play was taking place in. The platform of the play now in sight just barely, he pulled out his telescope and peered through the lens. There he could see the stage, the curtains, and the people sitting on the rows of benches. Looking further down, he caught sight of what was on the other roofs ahead of him. Artillery cannons. He muttered to himself. He scanned the area to see more of them on the outskirts of the buildings which encircled the space the play was taking place. He began to count the number of troops on the buildings. There must have been dozens on each rooftop armed with their standard rifles and wearing Marley uniform. He looked at the artillery pieces. Next to them were shells, regular-looking artillery shells. They're anticipating an attack. He muttered, unless they know something might happen, why else have regular shells at a celebration? He lowered the telescope. If we leave any of those standing, then a Titan fight will be short. In his mind he tried to devise a plan. If I don't stop Aaron, then my first priority will have to be knocking those cannons out. Suddenly the cheer of trumpets and drums rang through the air as the play was about to commence. Ed looked back to the platform to see lines of people dressed in brightly colored uniform playing their instruments. As everyone was seated, he spotted a lone Marley soldier escorting others away from the crowd. Ed looked through the telescope, spotting Yelena and the Titan shifters. There you are. He muttered as he spotted Yelena. Even from a distance I can still spot you, you giant Titan woman. He frowned slightly. Hey, what are you doing here? Said a voice behind him. He quickly turned around to see a single Marley soldier with a rifle walk up to him confused. No one's supposed to be on the roof. He looked at Ed and noticed the scarabs sticking out of the thin coat he was wearing. Ed quickly rushed over to him as he tried to point his gun at Ed. Ed grabbed the gun in one hand while striking the Marley soldier in the face with his other, sweeping their legs and throwing them onto the ground. He struck the face of the soldier once more before they could move, their head bouncing off the floor, knocking them out cold. Ed quickly stood up. He ran to the door to the stairs and slammed it shut, clapping his hands together and placing them on the shut door, the metal expanding and sealing the entrance tight. He turned his head back to the play. Taking out the handles of his ODM gear, he sprinted towards the edge and jumped off, once more hopping across the roofs. Oi! Yelled a Marley officer. Standing by the shore of the coast, he could see 3 medium-sized fishing vessels. He waved them forward as a figure at the front of the boat came into view, waving back at them. Why the hell are there people out here fishing at this time? Asked his partner with a cigarette in their mouth as they both watched the ships approach. Do they even have permits? Probably not. Come on, let's ask some questions. He said, pushing his partner slightly, urging him forward as they moved down to the beach and towards the water. The fishing vessels beached into the rocky coastline gently. Rope ladders were flung off the sides as people dressed with thick boots and large hooded coats jumped off the beach. You, what the hell are you doing fishing this late? Asked the officer. The hooded figure reached for hood and pulled it back to reveal a young man with a long face and slight facial hair and long ash-brown hair. Sorry, we all just thought since everyone was busy with the big event we'd fish without too much interruption or competition. He explained with an innocent smile. Is that right? The officer replied, you guys got a permit or permission slip? The young man reached into his coat's pocket. The officer looked behind him to see more figures appear from the boats, dumping hulls of fish onto the beach as well as a few boxes. Yeah, right here. The young man handed them the piece of paper. The officer looked through the paper. Everything looks to be in order. He peered over his shoulder once more to see the haul of fish. Pretty impressive catch you got there. You get that this night? Yes, sir. The young man replied. Like I said, it's easier to fish when you don't have others around. The other hooded members began to carry the haul and boxes further to shore. How long you been fishing for? The officer asked. Well, I just started really. The young man replied sheepishly, scratching the back of his head. There's a lot of you. How many boats are out there? The officer asked, his partner going up to the haul of fish. Well, there are a few more boats. "Hey wait," said his partner looking at the fish, "some of these are decayed." He looked at them. "You said this was from just last night." The officer ran up to the haul of fish. The decay was visible when inspecting it. The officer reached for their rifle and turned back to the young man. "Stay there, you got some explainin' to do." Suddenly he felt a sharp and piercing pain through his back and into his stomach. The young man flinched slightly before composing himself. He looked down to see a long and thin line of metal sticking out of his stomach, a burning sensation spreading across him like a flood filling up a sinking ship. There was 2 subdued shots which silenced his partner before he could react, holes suddenly appearing in his chest and his forehead, blood splattering around, as he slumped down onto the ground. The blade that stuck out from his stomach quickly receded as it was pulled back. The officer could barely stand on his feet before the person behind him kicked him down onto the ground, his face landing onto the wet pebbles facing the shore. "To see more boats coming through." "Well, that almost worked," said a deep and calm voice behind him. A foot stepped over him as one of the hooded figures walked towards the young man, putting down their hood down. He saw nothing, the back of their head and its black hair, and the long bloody blade in their hands. "Lieutenant, get the men ready and prepare to move," said a more effeminate voice. A figure nearby came into sight as they pulled down their hood to reveal a woman with short ginger hair and a serious look on her face. "Yes, squad leader," the young man said as he rushed away. The officer coughed slightly, choking on their own blood as their body began to feel cold. The other boats landed onto the shore as other figures began to scramble out, some carrying large guns and what looked to be rockets, running out of his sight. "Squad, secure the area, Team 1 head to the meet point." Someone barked out orders out of his sight. He tried to move his hand, as if to somehow crawl away. "Give rid of the bodies." There was a sound, like someone heaving as they lifted something heavy up, the dragging of feet on pebbles as his partner was carried past his view and then thrown into the ocean. The woman with the ginger hair came back into sight and looked down at him. They both stared at each other for a second. Her coat was now off, revealing her uniform, the metal pieces forming a skeleton around her back, a strange device behind her and 2 guns in both hands. She looked sad, with a frown on her face, tilting her head slightly. "I'm sorry." She pointed one of her guns at him. There was a very familiar clicking of metal before a muffled sound of a gunshot. Then complete darkness. "War Chief Yeager, you are needed elsewhere," said the Marley soldier as they led Porco and Pike away. "Sure thing," Zeke said, waving at them as he walked off. He turned his head back to watch them turn the corner of the road as he continued to walk ahead, the street in front of him almost empty of people, most getting as close to the play as possible to watch or hear it. Still though, Zeke had been a trained warrior and soldier for years, so he knew exactly when eyes were on him. He looked around almost casually until his vision came upon a sight which half intrigued him, and terrified him. A person standing on the ledge of a building, their silhouette against the night sky. "Creepy," Zeke said with a weak chuckle. The silhouette pointed towards a nearby alleyway as they jumped and zipped over the street and onto another building. Zeke turned his head to the alleyway. He gulped and sighed as he walked towards it hesitantly. As he passed into it, suddenly the exits began to close off like sliding doors, trapping him inside. He stepped back a bit perturbed, and then the sound of someone landing onto the ground himself caught his attention. "Didn't think you'd go to that much trouble," he said as he turned around. "All this just to tall dash." Edward grabbed Zeke by the collar and slammed him against the wall hard. "Gah!" Ed pushed him down, bring him to eye level. Ed then placed a blade over his chest, the point of the blade just poking him. "You're gonna answer me, but only when I say so," he told him. "All right," Zeke said in a calm but still plainly concerned tone. "Just what the hell are you planning?" Ed questioned. "I've already told you and everyone else what I want. It's the same as you," Zeke replied. "Bullshit," Ed growled. "All these years and you still hold it against me?" Zeke replied. Ed pressed the blade slightly into him. "You sure you wanna do that? I could transform, you know. Shifters don't transform instantly, and I don't need anything more than half a second to kill you." Ed threatens. Zeke sighed as he narrowed his eyes. "I want peace and to protect Eldia and its people across the globe, which by the way is a lot more than what you and your brother want," he spat. Edward pressed him against the wall. "Don't give me that bullshit," he responded. "Protect Eldia? You tried to slaughter us back at Shiganshina. I remember what you said. It was a battle, I had to fight, otherwise my cover would have been blown. Zeke replied as if stating the obvious. What would you have done? Edward was silent. Exactly, I know you hate my guts, but the truth is if you want to help those people live for generations as your God put it, then you need me. You and your commander's little covered meet and greet tour with backwater nations and rebel groups is cute, but just forming a ragtag alliance isn't going to be enough for people to take you seriously or not want you dead. Ed lowered his blade, his eyes looking off to the side. I don't have to justify myself to you. He growled. I'm sure you're more than intelligent enough to see the irony in THA. Ed shoved Zeke into the wall again. Next question then, where's Aaron? Ed questioned, lifting his blade up again. What makes you think I'd know? Zeke asked. Ed pressed the blade in between Zeke's shoulder and chest. Zeke shuddered as the memory of his first encounter with him entered his mind. You called me Hohenheim last time we met. Ed replied, the only person who knows that are the scouts here or the people working for Aaron, and if you think I don't like you then I guarantee the regiment feel the same too. Ed dug the blade in deeper. So where is Aaron? What will it change? Zeke questioned, you poisoned Udo just to stop him from being here. Clearly you have no faith in yourself to stop what's going to happen, and you must know you can't go against the tide of this world. You don't know what we've done, we've faced impossible odds before. Ed replied. I'm sure you have, but you've got an entire world and history up against you. Zeke said you think you can get people to understand. They understand and they're afraid enough to cry out for Eldia's death, your friend's death, your brother's, and that precious NE dash. Ed dug the blade into Zeke's shoulder, tearing through the fabric and skin. He placed his hand over Zeke's mouth, muffling his cries. You've steered off topic. Where? Eyes. Aaron. He removed his hand from Zeke's mouth. How about you use your head? Zeke said. Where the hell do you think he'd be if he wanted to show himself for such a big moment? Ed pulled the blade out of Zeke's shoulder. Zeke whined as he grabbed at the wound, smoke pouring out into the air. The building behind the stage. Ed muttered. He stepped back from Zeke and pointed the handle of his blade towards the ledge of the roof before pulling himself up and landing onto the ledge. Whatever you think you're gonna do, I wouldn't bother, you can't stop this. He said as he got up. Zeke looked up. Wanna let me out? Ed clapped his hands and placed them on the wall, the entrances of the alleyway opening up again. Falco watched in stunned silence as Mr. Kruger, the man who he had trusted and helped, who encouraged him and gave him the strength to save Gabby, untied the knot over his limb as a trail of smoke erupted from the trouser leg. All in the dim light of the oil lantern which illuminated the cramped basement. The rebel against our peace, his name is Aaron Yeager. Willie declared to the sound of trumpets. Skin of flesh began to form to the hiss of smoke as Aaron's leg began to regenerate into a foot, wiggling his newly formed toes. The threat to our world is real, and a man outside of the royal bloodline, who holds now allegiance to the ideology of King Fritz, possesses the instrument of humanity's destruction, the founding titan. You tricked me. Falco muttered out weakly, just getting Aaron's attention. You encouraged me. I respected you, but this whole time. I'm sorry, Falco. Aaron replied, but you really helped me here. Falco was confused before it suddenly hit him. Those letters. He blurted out, I helped send those letters for you. Where did they go? You told me they were for your family. No, they didn't. Aaron replied, truth is I probably didn't need you, but I didn't want my comrades to learn about who was helping me, so I needed you as bridge to them on my terms. Wah! Falco dropped to the floor. I was just some pawn you used. Reiner stayed quiet watching Aaron see. Comrades. He muttered. Aaron Yeager has in his possession the ability to bring the rumbling towards our doorstep. Willie announced, while we saw the rise of weapons against Titans in the last war, nothing could possibly stop the threat of millions of colossal Titans, we would be powerless against it. Aaron leaned forward as they continued to listen to Willie's words. Aaron Yeager is not the only threat we face. Falco continued to look at Aaron, who began to narrow his eyes and look towards the small window. The island is aided by two more. From the experience of our brave warriors we know of two brothers who claim to have been called to our world by God himself to aid the devils of Paradise, possessing sorcery known as alchemy, manipulating the elements, shaking the ground and changing anything to their likening. to enrich them, growing their strength, teaching others their ways, and even seducing some to their power. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Everyone turned their heads towards it. Falco wanted to scream out for help, hoping that the person behind that door had to be a Marley soldier, a worker, or anyone, who was on their side. The door rattled slightly as someone tried to open it. Then there was a flicker of blue light, like electrical sparks on the door handle. Falco gasped at the sight. Reiner sucked in air through his nose quickly as if to brace himself. Aaron just sat there, calm. He hummed. The servants of the devils, their champions, are named Alphonse Elric. The door opened, and a person stepped in. The first thing Falco noticed was the straps across them. They were dressed in regular clothes, a black eye patch covering their right eye, long golden hair tied back in a ponytail, and metal chunks strapped to their legs. And Edward Elric. The man calmly closed the door behind him. "Hello, Ed." Aaron greeted him coldly. Falco squirmed as he tried to press himself into the wall. Two of the people who Willie Tiber had identified as threats to the world were here, within touching distance of him and Reiner, and just a few meters away from everyone else. "How did you find me?" Aaron asked, almost uninterested. "Your brother sold you out," Ed stated plainly. Ed reached to his side and pulled out a handle before them, attaching it to the metal chunk strapped to his leg. There was a small click sound before he pulled a large blade. "Come quietly, Aaron. I don't want to drag you home." Falco's breath was caught in his throat as he staggered back at the sight. "What's that for?" Aaron asked. "Insurance," Ed replied. "Get up, we're leaving." "Why the rush? Let's just stay and listen to the play," Aaron said, pointing to the small window above them. "We have received messages from them, talks of injustice, liberation, and revenge for Eldians across the globe, and one final message just yesterday, a threat to take control. And with their powers they are more than capable of doing, using their allies they will rule this world once more and seek their vengeance." "That's right. This is the perfect chance," Falco thought as he looked between the two. "I don't really understand, but the founding titan and one of the alchemists are here, right now. Everything is depending on me and Captain Braun. Rule the world," Ed repeated with a scowl on his face. "Bring about vengeance, what a load of crap." Edward looked to Falco, who flinched as he looked at him. "I'm not here to do any of that, my brother isn't here to do any of that, we're here to protect people. Just like Willie Tiber out there, wanting to protect the world from us," Aaron remarked. "Can't escape it, we're the bad guys who might put the world under our boot." Aaron looked at Reiner. "But it's no different than you tried to do to us, isn't that right?" Aaron said, looking at Reiner. "So many innocent people eaten by Titan, my own mother included, and for what reason? Was it to save the world, Reiner? That's what you told Alphonse and Petra when they captured you." Reiner shuffled in his seat uncomfortably, looking at the ground, not wanting to make eye contact with anyone. That was the idea, to take the founder and save the world." "I understand, Reiner, you believed you were doing right," Aaron said as he scratched the side of his face, revealing to Ed the cut on his hand. Ed pointed the blade at him. "You're gonna cut me?" Falco watched, confused, eyes fixed on the two. "You know what will happen if you try." "Come quietly," Ed demanded. He turned to Reiner and then glanced at Falco. "You two don't try anything, just stay put and I promise no one has to get hurt." "I'm sure you hurt a few people to get here," Aaron replied. Edward turned back to him. "You've spending your time trying to stop me, but what are you going to do about them?" Aaron said, looking out to the window. "Are you going to stop them? As I have said before, the power that they possess has seduced other nations to them," Willie announced. "Some of those nations sit here around you right now, listening and denouncing the history of the Eldian Empire, but dealing with the devil, hoping to benefit from a future where humanity's dark history could start again. They won't be merciful to our allies nor us." Aaron said, "It doesn't matter to them, Eldian or not, it's just power. The hate in history was just something that was useful to have and teach." Aaron looked at Reiner. "Isn't that right, Reiner? We're all the same, good and bad people, all just people just told the ignorant lies of their forefathers." Aaron leaned forward. "It must have been hell, I think I understand." Reiner leaned forward as if to move out of his seat. Ed quickly turned to Reiner, pointing the tip of the blade by his neck. Falco flinched as Reiner froze before sitting still. Do it, he said. What? Ed replied, perplexed. The reason the walls came down was because of me. Annie, Berthold wanted to go back but I made them continue. He muttered, his voice beginning to croak. I should have died there, not Marcel, not Anne and not Berthold. I wanted to survive, I wanted to be a hero, and instead I got my friends killed. Please, either of you just kill me, I can't stand this anymore. Small drops of water hit the stone floor, dropping from Reiner's face. Pike and Porco followed the Marley soldier down an empty street. The only sound was their footsteps and the petering echo of the play behind them. The only lights were spread are street lamps and house lights from windows. Why's the colonel so far away? Porco commented, you'd think he'd be watching the play. It's an urgent meeting, he thinks our enemies have infiltrated our country. The Marley soldier replied. Infiltrated? Pike asked, perplexed. Spies, Magath feels that it isn't safe to have his warriors out in the open. The Marley soldier said. Marley soldiers are descending onto this position. Really? Pike replied, I feel like I've seen you before, maybe without the beard. The soldier stopped, halting them. Through here. The soldier pointed, it's a shortcut. A dark alleyway. The soldier went through quickly. Hey, wait up, Porco said. He was about to walk forward when Pike grabbed him by his shoulder. Porco, something doesn't seem right. Pike said, stay focused. Porco nodded his head before the two continued to follow the Marley soldier down the alleyway. The soldier stood at the end of it waiting for them, looking at them. Suddenly there was a sound of something pushing through air, for just a second. Pike looked up to see two people dressed in dark clothes with something silver attached to them fall directly above them. Pork dash. The two people jumped onto them, pinning them to the ground as they forced a piece of cloth into the mouths. The sound of zipping cables filled their ears as more people began to hold them down, their faces on the concrete. Pike looked towards the Marley soldier watching them. They lifted up their helmet to look at them with a straight-line smirk as they turned and walked away. Porco tried his best to fight back, kicking and thrashing around, Pike doing the same but to no avail as their captors began to bind them. They're trying to capture us. If they put in a tranquilizer then we have to transform quickly. Suddenly a wet cloth was placed over their mouth and nose. It smelled sweet and almost like hospital. Pike, what it was, she held her breath trying not to breathe it in. We only have a few minutes before it kicks in, the smell now invading her nose and going through her panzer unit. Where are you? She looked back at Porco, still trying to kick and thrashing but only weakly, each kick weaker than the next as his muffled grunts slowly died down. Pike tried to hold her breath, each time trying not to take too much in before trying again. She felt her eyelids before heavy and her eyes roll back as unconsciousness began to take hold. Pike! Yelled someone, flashes of light and loud bangs broke her back. Gah! Yelled one of the captors. She looked up to see one of her captors clutching at their arm as a few others returned fire. Suddenly a stray shot struck Porco's leg. Fuck! Get out of here now! Ordered one of the attacks as they fired cables from their guns and zipped back up the wall. There was a distant scampering of feet and more cables. Pike felt herself become more at ease as her unit came to their rescue, unbinding them. They flip her over, slapping her lightly on the face. Stay awake! One of them yells out. Porco! She turned her head towards him, trying to look and see other members of her team tend to him. We have to warn the others. She said to her teammates, they're here, the Paradise forces, get me to the cart's armor, we have to hurry. She saw Porco sit up lazily, his body swaying slightly as he tried to lift his head up. Porco, warn them. I do not wish to die. Willie stated, tears welling up in his eyes as he stood there in front of the hundreds of delegates, stage lights bathing him in a blanket of white, because I was born in this world. There were bright flashes of light as the cameras took photographs of him. We may belong to different nations and races. But I ask any of you who do not wish to suffer the fate of our ancestors, do not let our children be a generation who lived in the darkness of the Eldian Empire, then lend me your strength. He proclaimed. Those hundreds of delegates stood up from their seats cheering and applauding him. The tears were now running down his cheeks. I want you to fight with me. He yelled out, against the devils of Paradise. his voice projecting higher than the audience. It is true. We have problems that keep the nations of the world from joining hands, but I believe we can band together in the face of this powerful enemy. We should be able to overcome anything if only we can work as one. The cheers from the crowd only grew louder and his voice only grew stronger. As ambassador for the Marleyan government, I, Willie Tiber, wish for world peace. He declared, and so I proclaim on this day. To the enemy forces of Paradise, this is a declaration of war. His word dragged on as the cheers raged until he could not yell no more, and the applause and the cheers finally drowned him out. He looked out into the crowd as he took in heavy breaths. He stood there, soaking in the atmosphere, the people, the sound, the lights and cool night air. And the fact that he was still alive. He felt perplexed, relieved, but still, he couldn't help but feel concerned. They were supposed to make a move, why haven't they? Willie bowed before the audience and took a few steps back as the curtains drew forward, closing him off from them. There was a chorus of claps behind him. He looked back to see the actors and the workers clapping. "Well done, M-Lord," said one. "Great performance, sir," praised another. "Brilliant, Lord Tiber, simply brilliant," said one of the actors. Willie bowed before them. This all felt like a dream. Like it wasn't real, like a strange dream. He was prepared to die in that moment, spend days and weeks mentally preparing himself and remembering the faces of his family. This was to be the moment. Yet here he stood still, breathing alongside the others who were meant to be unwitting sacrifices to the cause. He turned his head to see his sister walking up to him with a fake smile on her face. She opened her arms out and hugged him tightly. "Brother." She whispered, "What happened?" "I don't know," he replied. He walked towards the backstage with his sister and his guard. "A group of workers working on the stage equipment. Leave, please," he asked. The workers quickly left the back room. This wasn't supposed to happen. Paradise were meant to attack us, Lara replied. "We knew about their spies for a while. The infiltrator should have taken the bait." Willie walked towards the mirror and leaned up against the desk, looking at his reflection. "Those messages we got, one spoke about peace and then the later ones talked about war. I thought that if the later messages we got were about vengeance and fighting, then it meant those advocating for war had won out, or that they were the same people who were just tired of being nice." He turned back to her. "What if I was wrong? What if Paradise does want to talk, wants nothing more than to make peace?" "Willie, you know better than that. We know what those devils are capable of." Lara told him, "If we entertain them now, then what's to stop them in the next 10, 20 years' time? You know as well as I do, we have to destroy them now." She reminded him, "I know what I saw. They know they can beat the Warhammer and any other Titan. We have nothing but the fact that we outnumber them now. We wait and we may lose that advantage one day too." Willie looked to the floor. "This is to save humanity, to fulfill the duty of the Tiber family and the 145th king." You're right, you're right," Willie replied. "We have to stay focused, keep with our duty." Suddenly there was a sound like lightning in the distance, then the rumbling of footsteps. Then there was yelling and screams as the sounds of heavy familiar footsteps landed near the stage. "Titan!" yelled someone in the crowd. "It's a Titan. Run!" "It's the Jaw!" yelled someone. "Stay calm, it's a warrior of Marley." They ran out, through the curtain, to see the Jaw Titan standing just to the side of the stage. The Titan lowered its head to the ground as its shifter burst out from its nape and slid down. The crowd calmed down a bit, getting back into their seats. The holder of the Jaw ran up to them. "Lord Tiber!" he yelled. His face had all the fleshy markings of a person whom just transformed. He raised his hand to the side. Willie quickly waved him inside through the curtains. "Speak, warrior," Willie asked. "What is going on?" "The Cart Titan and I were lured into a trap, sir. Enemy forces attempted to apprehend us but were stopped, thankful," he explained. "The Cart Titan and the Panzer unit are arming themselves as we speak." "The enemy?" Willie said. "They're here then." He looked towards Lara and his guard. "Get Colonel Magath on the radio." "They didn't take the bait. Looks like they're using this moment instead just to weaken us." Suddenly the ground underneath them shook, like someone pulled the rug under their feet. And before anyone else could react, there was a bright burst of light just a few meters away from them and a loud bang as the stage boards underneath them was torn apart. They all looked up towards the small window. the distinct sound of lightning catching their attention, followed by the screams and shouts from others and the running footsteps of those nearby. "Someone's transformed," Falco muttered. He looked back to the others. Aaron remained calm, Reiner confused, but Ed looked scared, fidgeting with the handle of his blade as he continued to point it at Reiner. No, dammit," Ed whispered loudly. Fuck. Not going according to plan?" Aaron asked. Then the sound of loud and heavy thudding arrived. The unmistakable sound of a Titan's footsteps followed until it was almost above them. "Capture mission was a failure then. I hope the scouts assigned got out alive." "Capture mission?" Reiner asked. "You don't want to escalate a fight, but you also think capturing our enemy's greatest assets go down well?" Aaron questioned. "I don't have to tell you anything," Ed replied. "True, but I guess that works both ways with us," Aaron responded. "Now every Marley soldier might know you're here, that we're here. How do you plan on getting us out of here?" Ed started to look around the basement room as if looking for something. Aaron got up from his seat and Ed quickly pointed his blade back at Aaron, who lifted up his bleeding palm. "I'm way ahead of you there. If you even think about dash." "You're threatening me?" Aaron questioned, thinking about stabbing me. "I think we both know that's never going to happen." Aaron walked over to the window. Falco shifted to the side, trying to get out of his way as Aaron walked towards him. Aaron stopped in front of him, offering his hand. Falco grabbed it hesitantly as Aaron placed a hand on his head, gently rustling his hair. Falco flinched as he felt Aaron's hand. Reiner stood up from his chair defensively. "Aaron!" he yelled. "You're a good person, Falco," Aaron said, looking down at him, ignoring Reiner. "I hope you pick the right side." Aaron turned back to Reiner and Ed, lifting his hand from Falco's head. "You're running out of time. You need to think of something now." Ed lowered the blade. "Damn it," he muttered. "Reiner, take Falco," he said, turning to him. "If anyone asks, tell them someone dressed as a regular person ambushed and knocked you out with chloroform, and that Falco was with you and that guy held you both here." He then looked to Falco. "Just go, you're free to leave." "Why are you doing this?" Falco asked, confused. "Because my mission is to get Aaron, and you'll die if they found out you two were this close to the devils of Paradise," Ed replied. He put the blade back in its scarab and clapped his hands together. There was a hollow echo, like someone rang a bell, before bright blue sparks flashing and dancing around him. Before he placed his hands onto the wall, there was a small rumble as a hole began to form. Then there was a bang. Their heads snapped back towards the window. More explosions followed by the screams and yells of the hundreds of delegates and guests above them. Chapter 58, The Siege of Liberio. "Keep it moving, we need to get these stands up today," yelled one of the instructors. All around, the workers continued moving the materials and equipment around as others hammered nails into the frames of wooden beams. "Hey lady, I need those costumes and props at the backstage," the instructor said to Louise. The sun was beginning to set as a bright orange light washed over the internment zone. "Yes sir," Louise yelled back, giving him the thumbs up. She pushed forward a cart filled with bags of clothes and fake swords and spears, up the ramp and to the stage. "Be careful of the electrical wires," the instructor yelled. She nodded her head in response. She pushed the cart backstage and began to dump the clothes and props onto the backstage near the others. She reached into one of the bags and pulled out a black metal box with a power sign painted on it with the words, "Do not open when in use," written on it and long wires wrapped around it. Louise looked around and then quickly moved through the curtains that covered the back of the stage. She poked her head out to check, only a few people talking to each other. She walked through and climbed down quietly with the black box in her hand calmly. She hopped onto the ground, and looked under the stage. Underneath was a mess of wires and electrical cables. She looked around again before ducking her head and crawling under it. In a mess of cables were black boxes with wires sticking out, each one with similar warnings on it. "Where is it?" She looked through the mess of wires. "Where the hell did Wim put it dash?" Then she saw it, unconnected wires with silver tips. "There you are." She unwrapped the wires, opening the box filled with TNT, a layer of flares and a single grenade. She took out the wires and then pressed her fingers onto the ground, digging into the dirt. From her boot she pulled out a long drill, digging it into the ground, creating a small hole. She put one wire into the hole and then connected it to the box and then the other wire to the loose one. She gently crawled out from underneath the stage, careful not to disturb the wiring of the bomb she planted. When she escaped, she quickly stood up and dusted herself off, looking around before quickly climbing back onto the stage and through the curtains back to the bag of costumes still on the floor. She looked into the bag and swiftly scooped up the cloak and hood, putting it on and left into the shadow of the building ahead of them through the streets of the internment zone. She placed the hood over her head and slipped into a back alley, littered with rubbish and unwanted junk, a single door to a building from the back. She knocked on the door, a metal shutter opened to a pair of eyes. Louise reached into her trouser pocket and pulled out the badge of a tree, showing it to the person behind the door. The shutter closed and the door opened. She stepped inside. The room was dark and dingy, a worn-out couch, a scratched table and another door. The door to the outside shut. Louise walked over to the other door and opened it, greeted to a flight of stairs going down. She walked down it and in towards a basement with a mined-out tunnel through it. She walked through the tunnel guarded by others and headed towards a room with light spilling out. Inside was a hall with benches and a board at the front with people seated down waiting. "Louise, just in time," Wim said, standing at the front. She quickly walked over to him. "Did you set the bombs?" "Yes, the bomb is planted," Louise said. "Did the others get to him first?" "Last we saw, Armin's team got to the hospital just a couple minutes before we did," Wim explained. "Beat them to it." "Good, good," Louise replied. Suddenly the room fell silent as the sound of a footsteps and a crutch entered the room. They turned their heads to see Aaron walking into the room as everyone remained silent and watched. He walked towards and stopped in front of them as they lowered their hood to him. "Were you successful?" he asked. "Everything is in place," Louise replied. "Nothing will stop this." There was a ringing in her ears, one that she had grown accustomed to during her participation in the Mideast War. It drowned out the screaming and stamping of feet around her for a while. She tried to open her eyes. There was a thick cloud of dust around her. She could feel the bits on her face brushing around her. "Gabby," said a voice. She couldn't tell if it was distance or right next to her. "Gabby," it said again, a bit clearer. "Gabby." She felt a hand grab her arm roughly as it tried to pull her up. "Get up," yelled the voice. "Zofia, Gabby, get up now." Gabby turned his head to see Colt try to pick her up. "Arg!" came a scream near her. Gabby looked to see Zofia in pain, as a long broken piece of wood stuck out of her leg. "Zofia!" Gabby screamed as she looked at her friend. "We have to get out of here," Colt said. "Gabby, stand up." She quickly got to her feet as Colt picked up Zofia in his arms. "Come on, let's get you to a hospital." Gabby looked around as the delegates and guests began to run away, soldiers shepherding them to the exit. She looked to the stage to see a mix of thick cloud of colorful smoke of blue, red, and green filtering into the sky unlike anything she had seen before. It was as if it was part of the play, a magical trick done by someone. "The general," Gabby whispered as she turned to the now destroyed wreckage of seats where the Marley Hire UPS had sat. Completely gone. She felt Colt grip her arm as he tried to pull her away, Marley soldiers scrambling around towards the explosions. They quickly moved from the seats and towards an open space as the delegates continued to run away. "We have to find a get Zofia to a hospital." He looked around, turning his head from side to side. "Falco!" he cried out. "Falco, where are you?" Gabby started to look around at the mass of people quickly dispersing, not a single sign of Falco since he left with Reiner. "Damn it!" He pushed Gabby along down one street and away from the stage. He turned his head to her. "How you holding up?" As they continued to move. "There's a piece of wood sticking out my leg," she said through her tears. "So not very good." "Right," Colt replied as they began to move away. "There's the Veterans Hospital not far from here." They quickly began to jog down the street as others ran past them. "That explosion," Gabby said. "The ground shook then, the stage blew up and then the seats where the officers were." Willie Tiber, he said that they could manipulate material. She looked back towards the colorful smoke now dying down. "It's them, they're here, and they did this." "Porco was on that stage, he didn't come out of it," Colt said. "Damn it if he's dead then." He turned back to see Gabby beginning to move away. Gabby, where are you going? Colt questioned, stopping her before she could run off. I have to get to Magath. She replied, if they're here then we have to stop them, we have to fight. She ran off past the others running in the opposite direction. Gabby, come back. Colt yelled, the further away she left, the dimmer his voice became. Gabby continued to run, ignoring Colt as she moved through the flow of people heading the other way till she found herself back near the heart of the incident. The colorful smoke was still thick in the air. She looked at the stage, expecting to see Porco rise from the rubble, but still nothing, as the square was now emptied save for the soldiers now investigating the area. She felt compelled to run towards it and find him. She stepped forward. Gabby, yelled a familiar voice. Is that you? She turned around towards it, Mr. Gate Guard. Seeing two familiar faces. I hardly recognized you, kid, you got some much dust on you, what the hell you doing here? One of them questioned. I want to help, I need to find Magath. Gabby responded, placing her hand on her chest. Don't be stupid, kid. The guard responded, grabbing her shoulders. You need to go home. I am a warrior cadet. Gabby proclaimed, as she pushed his hands off, a veteran of the Mideast War and the person who helped our motherland win its final battle, and I'll help it win its first battle against the devils, so tell me, where is Magath? The guard sighed and shook his head. Damn it, he's a checkpoint. He replied, but you're only going unless we take you there, got it? Thank you, mister. Gabby replied, saluting the guard, before they quickly rushed off down the street again. Ed grabs Aaron by his collar before throwing him against the wall and pressing him against it. What did you do? Ed demanded. Aaron looked at Ed, a calm and unfeeling expression still on his face. I didn't do anything. Aaron replied, you're the one who did it. Ed pulled back before striking Aaron against his cheek and sending him to the ground. Aaron spat out a tooth onto the floor. First time you've ever hit me outside of training. He wiped the blood seeping from his lips with his hand. Ed looked back to the tunnel. The hole was open but incomplete. Was that all the bombs you had planted? Aaron got up to his feet. You want to take that chance? Ed pointed the blade once more, pointed it at Aaron. He rolled his eyes and walked towards Ed. He grabbed the edge of the blade and angled it to his chest. Do it. He said, put some force in it, and this. Aaron tilted his head to the side slightly. You won't though, you're not dumb or brave enough to do it. Ed pulled the blade away. Don't move. He said. He turned back to Falco and Reiner. You two, keep quiet and don't try anything. He looked around the room once more, trying to find a way out. Reiner, if you still want to save the world, then here's your chance. Aaron said, chances are the people above us are already evacuated. Reiner gasped slightly, stepping forward slightly before Ed raised his hand at him. Don't. Ed said, you want to take that chance? Would you be alright killing Falco or anyone else nearby to fight us? He began to pace around the room. What the fuck did you want to achieve? He questioned Aaron. We already talked about this. Aaron replied, it doesn't matter anyways, they declared war and you helped fired the first shot. Ed shook his head as he squeezed the bridge of his nose. Turns out you can't make people drop their hatred even if you are willing to give them the future. God damn it. Ed growled. He sighed heavily. Stay put. He said, we'll just have to stay put for the others to come and get us. Stay put and wait. Aaron questioned, you want to stay here and wait for rescue while the Marley army comes to the internment zone? I don't think you're thinking this one through. Ed stuck his hand out to Aaron. I know, but just shut up. He turned to Reiner and Falco. I'm going to be straight with you. The mission was to capture the shifters and I was meant to secure Aaron. This was supposed to happen as quietly as possible and no one was meant to know we were here at all. We're not here to start a war, the opposite, we want to prevent one. We tried sending messages to your leaders and the Tibers, but it looks as though someone stopped us. Ed then turns to Reiner. Reiner, I know you feel guilty for it, I can't give you forgiveness, redemption, or anything like that, but you can help stop this. Come quietly with us, we just need to force a negotiation between the sides. That's why we needed to capture the warriors. Once that happens, Erwin, myself and Alphonse and Historia will all be gunning for peace. Historia? Reiner asked, almost perplexed. What does she have to? Oh right, long story short, she's queen. Ed said. Reiner gasped slightly. taken completely by surprise, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that we want peace. I don't want to fight you or Marley, the Mideast, or anyone. We've both killed enough people. I don't know if I can do that. Reiner said hesitantly. How can I trust you? Ed placed out his hand. I know you can't trust me. The only time we didn't try to kill each other was when we first met, but I befriended people who have tried to kill me before and I can do it again. Falco watched Reiner as he stared at Ed, looking down at his hand before lifting his to reach out. You asked them to stay put and not interfere, now you want Reiner to come with you. Aaron said, watching the two. What changed? Ed closed his hand slowly before turning to Aaron. I'm improvising. He replied, I've gotten this far being winging it and working with what I got. Pragmatism? Aaron questioned. There was a scowl of his face, and for the first time ever, Falco noticed that the calm demeanor began to shatter. Is that how you intend on going through with the future of the walls too? Ed turned to face Aaron, the two staring each other down. So, you're ready to talk now? Magath quickly ran down the flights of stairs, each time glancing at the windows of each level and onto the space below, and his own men swarming around the area as what individuals remained fled quickly out of the seating area. Behind him the sound of dozens of footsteps followed. He turned back to see a scatter line of his troops behind him as they tried to keep up. Go, hurry! He urged them. He sprinted down to the ground level and then through the doors. He watched for a second as the soldiers ran around. He quickly grabbed one just running by him. Where's the Jaw Titan? He asked, yelling at the troop's face. A team pulled him out of the stage rubble not that long ago, sir. He was near the blast. His body is torn up. The soldier explained. Magath felt his heart drop through his stomach and into hell. He's still alive but incapacitated. Magath sighed. Thank God. He replied, Tiber, what about him? He is alive. Theirs was Titan crystal around him. It looked like the Warhammer, but he didn't have any of the shifter marks on him. The soldier said, we don't know where the holder is though we dash. Do not tell anyone that. Magath replied sternly. The soldier nodded their head. Where's Willie Tiber? He's being treated at a military checkpoint to the north for wounds. The soldier said, he's alive and conscious. Magath nodded his head and gently pushed the soldier on. He turned to his soldiers. Continue to secure the area. We don't know if this is the enemy first or only attack. The troops saluted him before quickly scrambling away. He quickly began to jog north, followed by a few of his men, passing through the other troops and the Eldians who were quickly running into buildings to hide. As he continued to move, a row of sandbags on either side came into view of him, soldiers and public security officers guarding the area as they shepherded people through. Colonel Magath. One of the guards saluted. Where's Lord Tiber? Magath asked. He's in there. The soldier pointed to the building opposite him, troops moving in and out of it. Magath nodded at the troop before rushing in. Soldiers parted ways as he entered. Inside, officers were crowded around a map, medics shuffled around and troops carrying boxes quickly moved out. Tiber, he said to one of the medics. They pointed to a door. He moved to the door, grabbing the handle and turning it open. Inside, a medic cleaning the blood from Willie's face, a white bandage wrapped around his head with a red spot seeping through. He was sitting on a chair. The interior of the room looked to an office space. Theo Magath, Willie said as he saw him. Thank God, you're okay. Magath said as he stepped into the room. He looked to the medic who nodded at him before leaving the room. He grabbed a chair and sat down in front of him. I guess our plan didn't work out exactly as we expected. Willie said. Still they attacked, though it was odd. Why is it odd? Magath asked, leaning forward. What did Porco tell you? The Jaw Titan holder, Porco Galliard. He said that the enemy tried to capture them covertly. Willie said. Then suddenly they set off a bomb past the end of the play? Wouldn't it make more sense to set it off during the play? And if you want to capture the warriors, wouldn't doing it quietly and using the play as a distraction work better? Magath stayed quiet as he listened. Sounds like two plans in conflict. He remarked. Someone wanted to weaken us right under our noses, another wanted to send a message. Willie said, the explosives, the smoke was colored, could that be alchemy? I saw that too, looks more like flares mixed in with a bunch of explosives. Magath said, the reports spoke about alchemy being used to create structures and things. There was only one instance of someone creating fire, but this looked planted and too theatrical. But the ground shook. Isn't that a part of alchemy, a disruption of the earth? Willie said, someone was trying to use the ground beneath us. Well, I don't know how someone turns rock and dirt into a bomb. Magath said, they must be far more intelligent than we believed, or someone made it look like they've done it. Willie said there was a silence in the room, only the muffled sounds from the other room. But why frame them for the attack? Whatever the reason, we know the enemy is here and they're after the warriors, it seems, and possibly more. Magath said. More divisions are heading towards the district and the navy will be stationed at the docks soon. Whatever Paradis has planned, we will have them surrounded. Then we need to rally Marley's forces. This is the time to dash. Suddenly there was a knock on the door as it opened. Colonel, we found one of the warrior cadets, said the soldier at the door. Magath nodded as the soldier rushed off. Magath turned back to Willie. Go, Colonel, there is a battle going on after all. Willie said, I'll be fine. Lord Tiber, for what it's worth, I am glad you made it out alive. Magath said. Thank you, Colonel. Willie replied, I'm glad to be alive too. He moved his head down to the floor as he gently rested his hands on his knees. Magath walked out of the room, shutting it behind him. He looked to see Gabby outside trying to look through the door. He rushed outside to see her. A girl covered in dark dust with messy hair over her face greeted her, Colonel Magath. She saluted. He knew that voice anywhere. Gabby, you're all right, he said. An exhausted smile appeared on her face. Are the others okay? Her face quickly became serious. Colt is with Zofia, she was injured in the attack, she said, but we don't know where Falco is. He's probably still with Reiner. Where's Reiner? Magath asked. I don't know, I think he and Falco went to see a friend, she replied. It was before the play started. Magath began to feel uneasy as he clenches his jaw. They might have walked into an ambush. Colonel Magath, Gabby yelled, interrupting his thoughts. I want to help, please let me help beat back the enemy. Don't be foolish, Gabby, Magath replied. You need to head home. Colonel, that's what we said, said one of two guards standing behind her. Colonel, Paradis is here. The enemy who Willie Tiber said threatens our motherland and wishes to start again. Thousands of years of darkness are here, Gabby stated. I cannot stand by and watch as they attack my home. I'll do anything I can to help. I'll pick up a rifle or help get supplies, anything. Magath sighed and shook his head. This is more than just proving yourself to be the heir to the armor. Gabby nodded proudly. Okay, more troops will be heading here. I need you to bring them to the different checkpoints to reinforce it. He looked to the two guards. You two, go with her. She's a warrior cadet, and Marley spent a lot of money to train her. The guards saluted him as the three quickly ran off through the checkpoint. Looks like the area around the square is filled with artillery pieces, said one of the scouts, looking through a telescope as Petra stood behind them. I count possibly 6 on each roof. Looks like Marley might have been expecting something else. Can you see the marker? Petra asked. No yet, squad leader, the scout replied. There's still a lot of smoke around, kind of blocking out the view. The scout continued to look around. Wait, I see it. The marker is on the building behind the stage in thick smoke. Petra tapped the scout on the soldier. Thank you, get ready to move. Yes, squad leader, the scout said, lowering the telescope and moving away to join their team. Petra looked around. A large golden bell hovered overhead directly below her. She was half tempted to tap on it. She looked to her squad, preparing themselves and their weapons, and Jean, her second in command, organized them. A large map lay at the center of the tower floor. Lieutenant, she called out, catching Jean's attention. He quickly moved to her. She handed him her telescope and pointed outwards towards the smoke. Our target is possibly in the building behind the stage, but it looks like the area around it is heavily guarded. Jean looked through the telescope. Yeah, if we head through there we might have to engage with their forces. There has to be a route to the location. Don't want to get bogged down in a gunfight, otherwise we might have to bring the other squads too, Petra said. We could use the smoke to our advantage. Maybe, if we leave now while it's still burning, we could probably get a team to pass through it. Jean said we would just have to clear a path through one side. One team could go for the attack while the others stand by. If anything goes wrong, then the fire support teams can respond quickly. I guess something good can come from this mess, Petra remarked. Still, we could do without Marley being on high alert. She turned to the rest of her team squad. On me, she commanded. The teams huddled near her and around the map. Fire support teams will hold these positions here and here. She pointed towards a few buildings around the center. Other teams will be on standby and act as resupply in case we get into trouble. Jean takes command. She looked over to another group. You guys are with me. We'll head to the objective and secure Aaron and Edward. Everyone silencers on. Petra walked towards the edge of the tower, looking back at her squad who stood behind her. Jean nodded. Petra nods back before leaping off of the ledge and into the air, firing the hooks of her ODM gear into the roof of a nearby building with the gas pushing her along, the sound of other hooks clamping into buildings just behind her. As they approached the buildings, she quickly spotted two guards standing on a roof ahead of them. Before they could catch them, they dropped to the ground after muffled shots took them out. Petra landed into the roof. Surveying the area, she watched as more guards were quickly taken out across from them as members of her squad took up their positions. Scouts carrying heavy weapons mounted them over the ledge and pointed them towards the artillery crews in front of them. She turned her head back to see Jean directing the teams into their positions. She let herself smile. You've come a long way, Jean. She turned her head back to what's in front of her. Ahead was what looked to be a building of flats ahead of her and a thick cloud of smoke in what looked to be in front of them. She raised her hand up slightly. A small team of scouts rushed towards her. She pointed ahead of her at the building ahead of them. That's the one. If anything happens, fire an acoustic round and fall back here. She stepped over to the ledge and pushed herself off as the others followed, firing their hooks onto the building, landing, and hanging onto its side. The rest of her team followed her. You four check the lower floors, Petra ordered. They nodded at her as they quickly went into an open window. Rest of you, head to the roof. They rappelled their way up, peering their heads and weapons over the edge to check if the roof was clear. They climbed up. You four, check the top floors, she ordered. 4 scouts rushed over to the entrance inside. The rest of you, keep an eye out for anything. She walked up to the bright glowing stone on the roof, picking it up and placing it in her pocket before placing an acoustic round in her gun. The remaining scouts with her rushed over from side to side checking the streets. Squad leader, said one of the scouts rushing to her, we have soldiers moving towards this building. The scout pointed to the ledge. They rushed over. Petra took out her telescope as she spotted a contingent of troops dressed in blue uniform armed with rifles arrive, meeting with a single person dressed in what looked to be a fancy outfit. Who's that? Petra muttered as she placed the telescope over her eye. She got a closer look. A middle-aged woman with dark hair dressed in what looked like a maid's outfit was talking to a few of the soldiers. Where did they come from? She asked. The soldiers came just now, squad leader, the scout said. But the woman there, she came from the stage. The stage? But that was blown up. Why would a random civilian or guest be near there? They turned to the same building. Both Petra and the scout ducked slightly. Get down, she said, pulling the scout down slightly, just hiding behind the ledge. The people below. The maid began to move the troops around before into the building herself along with a few of the soldiers in blue. Suddenly a rush of footsteps behind her caught her attention. Petra turned to see the other scouts. Building searched, no sign of either Edward Elric or Aaron Yeager, said the scout. But squad leader, we have a massive problem. We spotted a group of soldiers dressed in blue uniform outside dash. I know, we spotted them too, Petra replied. No, squad leader, at the front of the building, they were pulling a person out of the rubble. There was Titan crystal around the places they were digging, the scout said. Petra's jaw dropped as she stared blankly at the scout. I thought we lured the warriors away. We did, but must have been the Warhammer, Petra whispered loudly. She turned back to the ledge and looked over it. The woman and the soldiers were gone. All of you checked the building. There's no sign of any of them in the building, the scout replied. But maybe there was another level. A basement. Petra's heart dropped to her stomach. Everyone get off the building now. She looked down, aimed her pistol into the air as she let off the shot. Paradis deserve better than an uncertain future, Aaron said, almost declaring it resolutely. And just how are you planning on helping Paradise exactly? Ed questioned, because all I see is someone with a bunch of radical buddies planting bombs to go off in front of a bunch of delegates. Ed began to raise his voice. They declared war first. This was merely a response, to show that we won't be pushed around. Aaron retorted. What would you have us do? Nothing? While they arm and prepare themselves to march on our homes. I wouldn't have us killing a bunch of innocent people. Ed fought back. I wouldn't have given more reason to think we were a threat or hate us. Have you looked outside? Have you met those two? Aaron questioned, pointing to Falco and Reiner. What about Armin, Mikasa, Eld, Oluo, Gunther, Hans, or the other hundreds and thousands of innocent people killed or suffering because of someone's hate and greed? You want to be preachy about this while they seek to kill us all and keep others in cages. Falco watched as the two continued to argue with each other. It was frightening to watch as Reiner, just as confused as him, watched too. Willie said these guys were allies, yet they act like they almost hate each other. He flinched slightly as Ed raised his voice again. Falco looked to the window hoping that someone would hear them. He contemplated screaming out for help. Wait. Aaron said, placing his hand up to Ed. Aaron looked over to the door. There was a noticeable tapping sound, getting closer. Footsteps. Ed turned to the door, readying his gun, pointing it towards the door. Whoever's there, this room is full, go somewhere else. Called out. The other side of the door was quiet. There was a thick tension in the air as they all wait for the other side to respond. Suddenly the door was pushed open, quietly banging onto the side of the wall to reveal a woman dressed in a maid's clothes staring back at them with a look of contempt. Who the hell are Dash? Warhammer. Aaron said calmly as he looked at her. Falco's breath was suddenly jammed as it tried to enter his lungs as he looked at the woman in front of them. Ed pointed his gun at her. I had a feeling we'd meet again, Elric. She said as she looked at the two of Ed and Aaron. And you, the usurper Aaron Yeager. I killed the Warhammer back at Shiganshina. You can't be Dash. Ed stopped as if he quickly came to the realization. God damn it. You failed to kill me, like you two will fail to bring back the Eldian Empire. She said. She then turned to Reiner and Falco. Warrior Braun, I never suspected that you would be here. Tell me, are you a traitor to the motherland? Reiner could only weakly whimper. We're not. Falco pleaded, putting his arms out. I brought him here. I didn't know who they were. I was tricked. Is that so? The Warhammer holder replied, almost unconvinced. I see the Beast Titan has left his mark on you, though that can never make up for the failure that was the Battle of Paradise. She said to them, I should have massacred you and your armies. Too bad, you got beat. Ed retorted. Not this time. The Warhammer replied. She raised her palm to reveal a cut on it. Reiner quickly gripped Falco. Ed took a step back as Aaron just stood there looking at her. Okay, listen, all that crap your brother? Family member said up there was just that crap. Ed said, we're not here to do any of that, we just want peace. And why should we believe your lies? The Warhammer questioned. Damn it, do we really have to do this? This isn't what we want. If we could just stop trying to kill each other for just 5 seconds. Dash. We aren't going to talk, her mind is already made up. Aaron said, as are the other nations of the world who want us dead. Tell me, Lara Tiber, what are you willing to do to save your motherland? The Warhammer twitched as Aaron spoke her name. Her face looked almost disgusted. Exterminate you and the devils of Paradise. Lara replied with conviction in her voice. That is what I will do. I see. Aaron replied, I want you to understand that what I do for my home and for all Eldians across the world that lives behind tall walls. If anyone wants to take my or another's freedom away, then I will not hesitate to take theirs in return. Aaron stared her down. I will keep moving forward. Is that so? Lara said. Any last words before I kill you both? She raised her hand up. Don't do this. Ed said, his voice sounded almost desperate. Suddenly streaks and flashes of light which were all too familiar to Falco began to swarm around Aaron like fireflies. The Warhammer replied in same as the room was quickly lit in a symphony of lights. Ed dropped his gun and turned to Falco, who was suddenly gripped by Reiner as he bit down onto his hand. Falco watched terrified as Ed clapped his hands together and launched himself into the hole in wall, blue sparks of light dancing with the golden rays as the wall closed up. The sound of a loud gunshot outside whispered into the commotion in the room. Falco turned to Mr. Kruger once more, who spoke one last time, in a voice that didn't sound his own. Forfait. Magath overlooked the open stage area once more. Back from the checkpoint he tried to gain further control over the situation, looking around at the city from the top of the roof, wondering about his next move and the enemies. "How's Galliard?" Magath asked to a soldier standing by a radio. The soldier relayed the questions and received a response. "Galliard is improving, but he's still unconscious, sir." The soldier replied, "However, the cart Titan is almost ready to be deployed and should be heading to this position as we speak." "Good. Any reports of the enemy?" Magath asked. The soldier relayed the question. "None so far, Colonel." The soldier replied. "If Galliard said they were ambushed, then they have to be here." Magath said, "If the plans were to just capture the shifters, then it's a failure. Would our enemy just drop a bomb on us and leave empty-handed?" He continued to look outward. "Have a team searched the area where the ambush happened?" "Yes, Colonel. There weren't any bodies, but they did see evidence of a battle." The soldier replied. "We have platoons searching the streets as we speak." "Good. Radio in the Navy. Make sure that the port is secured and patrol boats at dash." Suddenly the sound of a gunshot caught his attention. Who fired their dash? Ground underneath them shook, as if they were objects standing on a table someone bumped into. Magath held firm on his feet as others around him fell. What the hell was that? As if to answer his question, two Titans burst out from the ground, behind the rubble of the stage and onto the empty space before them, crashing into the ground, the front of the building collapsing onto the destroyed stage and empty seats. Magath and the Marley soldiers rushed over to the edge to watch as one of the Titans began to overpower the other as he sat on top of it and rained in punches from below onto the other Titan's face. He stared at the attacking Titan, its muscular build, the long dark hair, bright glowing green eyes and monstrous sharp teeth as it let out an ear-striking cry into the sky. "It's him, Aaron Yeager." He looked to the other soldiers. "Man the artillery," he ordered. The others quickly scrambled to their positions. "So he really was here then, hiding right under our noses." "Doesn't matter, you've shown yourself now and—" Suddenly the soldier next him was pushed over, falling over the ledge of the building lifeless. Magath quickly turned his head to see just zipping past people dressed in black with what looked to be metal strapped to them as they held the guns pointed at them. Flashes of light and loud bangs cried out into the air as they gunned out his men. Magath ducked to the ground as their attackers continued to fire on them, tossing explosives at their artillery pieces as they were thrown around from the explosions. The enemy forces quickly jumped off the ledge and seemingly flew away. Scatter across the roof was the dead bodies and injured lying on the ground and the pieces of cannons. He looked to the other rooftops, before grabbing the radio speaker. "Enemy forces at the center, any remaining cannons fire on the Titan and all troops fire on the enemy forces." He looked out back towards the center, Aaron Yeager's Titan still pummeling the Warhammer until he was impaled from a spiraling cone from the ground which lifted him up into the air. As the Warhammer tried to stand up, the enemy quickly swarmed the Titan and fired on it. Thin rods struck the Titan and exploded, knocking it down before it could fully heal as Aaron's Titan tried to free itself from the long spiral. "All soldiers, fire on the enemy, help the Warhammer Titan," he ordered. What was left of the Marley forces started to fire their weapons at the enemy forces. A rough and dotted chorus of gunshots and bright flashes of light tried to strike down the zipping enemy as they flew away. Then, immediately responding, the scattered gunfire of Marley was then instantly followed by a hailstorm of shots from buildings behind the apartments behind the stage, the bullets striking through the thick smoke and tearing apart the survivors and bouncing off of the Warhammer Titan. Magath threw himself to the floor once more as zips of light flew just over him. "Crawl," he ordered. Off the rooftops, those survivors quickly through the door. He and the others crawled to the staircase, quickly getting up as they ran down the stairs and onto the floor level beneath the rooftop. Magath watched from the window as the hail of bullets shifted towards the Warhammer Titan, followed by explosive projectiles being thrown at it. The machine guns of the enemy then grew louder as the sparks of gunfire were spotted now on the edges of their former positions around the center. Suddenly Aaron's Titan fell to the ground, landing onto the floor with a loud crash before standing up. The gunfire stopped, as he then slamming the Warhammer Titan back onto the ground. The warhammer tried to stand up and reach out its hand. A sound like thousands of glass windows shattered called out as a spiral of white light formed in its hand to create a blade. The warhammer tried to swing it at Eren, who catches the warhammer's wrist before then striking the warhammer in the face with its free hand, almost tearing off the head of the titan from its neck. Its head dangled as if now unconnected from the rest of its spine. "It's going to eat the warhammer," Magath stated as he and the Marley soldiers could only watch as it grabbed its head, raised the warhammer's body up slightly and positioned its neck ready as it widened its jaws. The building then shook, as if something jumped onto it. Magath looked up before looking back to the titans. Eren's titan looked up towards the building in front of him when suddenly machine guns opened fire on the titan, cutting holes through him. Eren's titan raised its hand to protect itself as it fell back. Suddenly the hails of gunfire from the enemy returned, focused on the thing above them. Below them the sound of more gunfire was heard. Magath looked down to see reinforcements arrive firing at the enemy. Magath quickly ran back up to the roof. He was greeted to the sight of the cart titan dressed in its armor as the 4 machine gun turrets strapped to it fired at the enemy's new positions as they shot back in a chaotic crossfire. Magath kept his head low as he approached the cart titan, bullets zipping by him as he took cover behind the leg of the titan. "Pike, good timing," he said as more soldiers entered the roof and fired back. "The enemy appears to have dug themselves in on the 3 buildings around the center," Pike said, observing the battlefield, bullets bouncing off of her armor. The warhammer titan then stood up, smoke pouring from its open wounds as it recomposed itself. It reached out its hand as a warhammer was formed in its fingers. It grasped at the handle of the weapon as it stared down Eren Yeager, who looked back at them. "Beware, one of the Elrics are here too," the warhammer said. "Magath, the armored titan is in the rubble, along with one of the warrior candidates, though I don't know if they're alive. They're behind Eren Yeager then in the enemy positions," Magath said, looking at the titan Pike. "Where's Zeke?" "I don't know, Colonel," Pike replied. "Last I saw him he was told by the imposter soldier to head towards the gate. Let's hope he wasn't ambushed by the enemy beforehand then," Magath said. "Colonel, there's something strange going on. It's dash." Sudden a rocket struck the ground near them, almost hitting the cart titan, forcing them to move. "We'll talk about it later. Priority now is to hold off the enemy forces until we can surround the internment zone," Magath stated. He looked back to the center as the 2 sides continued to trade shots. "Where the hell is Zeke anyways?" he muttered to himself. Zeke took a long inhale of his cigarette before blowing it out into the night sky. The smell of the ocean was strong and the sound of the motor engine of the boat filled his ears. He looked back towards the city and its lights and the trail of water being cut through by the propellers of the boat. He looked ahead as a Marley destroyer came into view. A person at the front of the boat began to wave at the ship. As they came closer he spotted Overwatching from the ship waving back. He flicked the butt over the deck. As they approached the ship, the destroyer grew closer till it overshadowed the ship. Zeke whistled as he looked at the ship. 2 scouts looked down at him before they threw a climbing net over the side. "Climb," said one of the scouts. Zeke turned to see the scouts behind him point their guns at him. "Very friendly," he muttered. "They aimed the gun towards his head all right," he said as he grabbed onto the net and began to climb up. As he was halfway through, the boat suddenly moved away underneath him. "Try not to fall," said one of the scouts watching him. Zeke continued to climb till he reached to the ledge and pulled himself up. As he stood up he was greeted a crowd of faces all looking at him, some blankly, some anxiously, but many with complete contempt. "Head to the bridge, the commander will see you," one of the scouts said. "Thank you," Zeke said as he walked away. As he passed through the deck and walked inside the ship he noticed the stares and glares of those on the ship. As he passed by people would stop and watch him walk by. Some muttered to each other as he passed them and others sneering. He walked up to the stairs and towards the front of the ship, a metal door to a room guarded by 2 scouts dressed only in plain uniform and armed with what looked to be machine guns. They stared at each other for a few seconds before the door opened on the other side. Zeke's eyes widened a bit as he raised his eyebrows. "Hello, Alphonse," he said as Alphonse caught sight of Zeke. The younger Elric brother was dressed in Marley uniform carrying a Marley rifle. He didn't say anything, instead only narrowing his eyes as he looked at Zeke and walked past without saying a word. "Nicer than his brother," Zeke commented. He looked to the guards. "I've been told to see Commander Irwin," he said, itching the side of his face. "He can enter," said a voice inside the bridge. Zeke looked at the guards before walking inside. The front was covered in a long line of windows facing the direction of the city and its coast. The controls of the ship were being operated by its crew as someone else stood by the steering wheel and another manned a radio. At the front, looking out of the window, was a tall figure dressed in the black scout uniform with short blonde hair and a built figure. He turned around to face Zeke. "Commander Irwin, good to finally meet you in person," Zeke said as he walked up to him. "Your reputation precedes you and you do well in living up to it," he commented. "Yelena informed me of your plans. It's ambitious." "Thank you," he replied with a blank expression. Zeke stood next to him looking out the window. "I'm serious. It would be easier to just collect Aaron and I and escape quickly." "It would, but if we have to do this then it's best we go the jugular," Irwin replied, "if to bargain with Marley or weaken them." Chapter 59, The Slaughter of Liberio. Falco slowly opens his eyes. His vision was a haze at first and the most immediate sound to his ears was the crumbling of debris around the container he had sheltered in. Then there was a light, a parting before him like the crack within a cave of darkness. He crawled towards it and squeezed his body through. As his vision cleared and the sound of crumbling rock subsided, he was greeted to the sight of a large battle. Rapid gunshots like multiple machine guns rattled in the air. If he closed his eyes he would certainly convince himself that he was back in the trenches, back in the Mideast as Eldian soldiers ran into Alliance machine guns. But he wasn't. He was home. His home was now a war zone between Marley and Paradise. Suddenly a rocket screamed through the air above him. He looked up to the projectile flyby with a trail of smoke as it struck a building with destructive force. He quickly spotted the Warhammer Titan standing by the building, a shield covering it as it held a Warhammer in its other hand. He saw the cart Titan carrying the Panzer unit on its back as the machine guns returned fire. There was a loud cry. He looked down towards the floor level to see Marley soldiers running out into the open, charging towards the other buildings and towards Aaron's Titan, who stood just to the side as it covered its neck and stared at the Warhammer and cart Titans. The soldiers on the ground began to fire their guns at Aaron. Falco could see the anti-tank rifles in their hands as its shots bounced off the crystal covering of its hand protecting its nape. But too quickly, they were gunned down by flashes of light on the rooftops. Falco watched as they tried to run but were simply shot down mercilessly before they refocused their fire on the cart and Warhammer Titan. The cart Titan roared out no. Suddenly another projectile was fired. This time it looked to have found its target, striking one of the pods of the cart's armor, killing a member of the Panzer unit. Falco could only watch in horror and grief at the sight. Then Aaron Yeager's Titan moved forward, lowering its hand to guard its face as he moved over into the center to face the Warhammer in front of it in an almost confident manner. Falco tried to move forward, inching forward while he ducked behind some debris. Then he felt the ground shaking as a flicker of blue sparks appears in a hole formed for a hand to reach out and grab the edge before pulling itself up. His breath quickly halted in his throat as Ed rose from the ground, covered in dust. He looked around. Falco could see his fist clenched tightly. "Damn it!" he loudly grumbled. Falco tried to move away. As he moved back his foot bumped into some rubble causing it to crumble to the ground. Ed snapped his head to the sound. Falco froze as the two looked at each other. He wanted to run away or call out for help but he hesitated. "We're not here for war." Ed walked up to Falco, his hands unclenched and raised slightly. "I befriended people who have tried to kill me before and I can do it again." "Falco, are you all right?" he asked as he knelt down in front of him. "Are you hurt?" "And no," he replied. "Okay, that good." Ed said. Suddenly there was a piercing Titan cry which caught their attention as the Warhammer slammed its shield into Aaron, pushing him back. She prepared to strike him with the hammer before Paradise soldiers flew around it and struck it with what looked like long spears, exploding around it. Ed turned back to Falco, a look of sadness on his face. "I'm sorry, Falco," he said. "I didn't want this to happen. You get out of here, find your family and get somewhere safe." Ed stood up. "Good luck." Ed then quickly ran away towards the fight. As he sat there watching, he quickly remembered Captain Braun. He turned back towards the shell he had left from. Looking at it more clearly he could now see it was a cone made of the fingers of the armored Titan. He looked inside the cone through the hole he crawled out from. "Captain Braun!" he yelled as he looked upon the still form of Reiner in the corner of the cone, his body absorbed into the flesh of the Titan. "Team leader, there are Marley soldiers heading towards the center. A scout said, looking through the scope on their rifle. Infantrymen, just rifles, and some of them look like Eldian troops. Marlowe peered in through his telescope to see a platoon of Marley soldiers run through a street just a few blocks ahead of them. Which team is placed there? He asked. Floch's team, sir. The scout replied, however our orders per squad leaders Nanaba and Ral are to hold these positions and not alert the enemy to our presence. Suddenly an explosion in the distance was set off which caught their attention as the fighting in the internment zone center raged on. Good, we just have to keep these areas clear for the evacuation. Marlowe stated, do not engage passing Marley troops, unless the enemy is creating blockades then keep the street clear. He ordered. If there's any mass movement of troops passing through then alert me and the other team leaders quickly. The scout nodded, I'll relay the message to the others. They replied as they hopped off the roof and then repelled themselves through the air. Marlowe turned his head back to the internment zone center, the sound of gunshots and explosions echoed loudly carried by the wind along with the cries of a titan. I hope they're winning, I'm sure they are, but we're running against the clock, the enemy's divisions will be coming down on us soon. He looked at his team, crouched behind the ledges of the roof and ventilation pipes, large guns mounted pointing at the streets ready to cut down any massive ranks of Marley troops that could pass through. Our teams have enough firepower to inflict heavy casualties on a company of troops. Team leader said one of the scouts. He turned to them, as they watched through their telescope, enemy squads moving through the same street, past Floch's team, looks like more infantry. Thank you, keep looking. If you see any of our defectors then direct them to dash. Suddenly there was a cry of gunfire nearby. Marlowe snapped his head to the sound to see the rooftops of a building just a few streets down shine up in dotted lights as flashes were fired towards the ground. What the hell? Team leader, should we head over? One of the scout asked. Marlowe turned to them, you three follow me, the rest of you hold this position. He ordered. He fired his hook onto the nearby building as three other members of his team followed. He pulled himself across the wide gap between the buildings as he hopped over. The gunfire grew louder and the sparks of shots clearer. He leapt onto the roof of the building, the backs of the scouts looking down in front of him. As they ran up to them the gunfire quickly stopped as a couple of the scouts jumped down to the ground. What's going on here? The scouts turned to him, a calm look on their faces. We were spotted, we returned fire. One of them replied, as if stating a simple and obvious fact. Spotted, how? Marlowe questioned confused, angry beginning to rise. How can they be so calm about this? Where's Floch? Marlowe asked. He looked to the edge. Scout troops began moving bodies over and tossing them into alleyways while the injured and prisoners were shoved against a wall, into two groups. Team leader Floch is clearing the street. The other scout replied. Don't worry, team leader, there were no Eldians, just Merlians. Marlowe looked at them questioningly. What the hell do you mean by dash? The sound of a loud kick and a gasped cry caught his attention as one scout threw an injured Marley soldier against the others as a group of four pointed their guns at them. Marlowe and his subordinates quickly hopped down, the gas slowing his fall, as his boots hit the ground and he sprinted up to them. What are you doing? He questioned. Don't tell me you were going to kill them. Why not? One of the scouts replied, it's not like these bastards wouldn't have deserved it. Marlowe pushed them back, standing in between both the scouts and the Marley prisoners. The others around started to watch. No, we don't kill POWs, you'd be tried for this, you dash. Marlowe. A voice called out. He looked to see Floch walk up to him, calm and serious. What the hell is going on? Marlowe questioned. We weren't supposed to engage the enemy, we just have to keep these streets clear for the defectors and informants to escape. That's exactly what we're doing. Floch turned his head before whistling. One of the doors of a building opened as a couple people dressed in regular clothes, some carrying rifles and machines, and of all ages moved through before heading down the street. We had to intercept or else they would be killed. Marlowe was stunned for a few seconds, his mind racing, but they wouldn't have known they were working for us in the first place and firing on them may have drawn others to here. They won't. Floch said as he glanced over to the side. Marlowe turned his head to see a scout begin to scribble a circle on the ground. Don't worry, we'll clean up the evidence. Floch then turned to one group of prisoners. It was only then did Marlowe notice the armbands on one group. Do you live here? Floch asked. The Eldian soldiers replied with a yes. Good, head back to your homes or stay out of our way. The scouts guarding them moved back as the soldiers tepidly moved away before running. Floch turned back to Marlowe. You should head back to your team. The group of 4 then moved back to the Marley prisoners, pointing their guns at them. Wait. He moved forward again before another scout held him back. Get off me. As he took his eyes off them for a second, the shattered and rapid gunfire cut through the sudden sharp cries as it cut through them. Marlowe could only watch in horror at the sight. Clean them up. Floch ordered as the scouts began to pick up the bodies of the Marley soldiers before shoving them into the back alley trash bin. The floor was stained in blood and bullet holes. Marlowe pushed the scout off of him as his fingers cocked his gun. His men lifted their weapons up slightly as they stood behind him. Those scouts near Floch looked at them, their body, head and weapons now pointing in Marlowe's direction. You wouldn't dare. Floch said. What happened here is a war crime, Marlowe responded through gritted teeth. I can't let any of you get away with this. War crime? This is Marley you're talking about. They've done worse and you're upset about this? And let's not forget what they did to us. Floch stated. Besides, we didn't execute any prisoners, there was never a fight here to begin with. Suddenly there was a slight shake behind them, noticeable but not enough to knock them off their feet as the holes in the ground were covered up and the blood sunk down into the pavement. Marlowe turned his head back to the scout who was near the alchemist symbol, who was now quickly wiping it away. We should head back to the rooftops, team leader. Who knows who might see us? Floch said as he pointed his gun to the ledge. Pike scanned the battlefield, her eyes sweeping across the center as the dotted flicker of lights off the opposing rooftops burst through the smoke and bullets struck her Titan's armor or the Warhammer's shield. Aaron Yeager, the holder of the founding Titan, walked back and forth from them, watching them as he waited for them to make their next move against him and his allies. Aaron's Titan stopped for a second as he cried out in front of them, goading them to attack him as he picked up a rock from the ground and then tossed it up into the air as it crashed into some buildings a few streets down. Pike's eyes wandered over in its direction before looking back at him, clenching her teeth hard, almost hard enough for it to crack. Is that your plan? Make us desperate enough to attack you head on? Pike scanned the rooftops once more. She thought back to the scouts' attack on the Warhammer Titan as it battled Aaron, how they almost overwhelmed it enough for Aaron to come just a Titan's breath away from devouring it. That's their tactic, getting us away from a fixed position and into an open fight where they can put us into a meat grinder. She looked below and the doors and entrances to the adjacent and opposed buildings. The only way we can stop that is if we clear out the buildings and turn the tables of Aaron, but... She then looked to see Marley soldiers hiding behind debris and rocks as gunfire rained down on them like storm of hail. My panzer unit can't lay down enough fire to cover their advance and hold off any attacking enemy forces, especially without. The right side of her panzer armor was quiet and lighter. They'll all pay for that. She shook her head. Keep it together, we can't avenge Carlos like this. Aaron's Titan then picked up another rock, raised it above his head, leaving himself open to an attack. The Warhammer dropped the sword it had in its hand as a spear formed in its hand. No. The Warhammer yelled out in defiance. Don't do it, Dash. It was obvious, as the Warhammer pushed its shield aside for just a second and left its body exposed in almost rapid succession. A wave of those rockets which killed Carlos were fired from the enemy's position and struck the Warhammer, pushing it back into the building as the force of the explosions struck it. Aaron then drops the rock to the ground as it charges the Warhammer Titan, ignoring the gunfire from Marley soldiers and the machine guns from the panzer unit as it grabs the Warhammer Titan by its shoulders and then tosses it back into the middle like an overzealous boxer not yet finished with their downed opponent. Aaron picked up the sword left by the Warhammer on the ground. As Aaron stood up, Pike was half tempted to quickly go for it and bite at it. Fire on the nape. Magath ordered. It seemed Magath had the same idea. And so did Aaron, as bullets bounced off harmlessly from the crystal surface which covered his neck, the loud bangs and piercing shots from the anti-tank rifle doing little more than added just a small dent on the already jagged surface as it approached the Warhammer Titan. The Warhammer looked up at Aaron and thrust its spear into his side. Aaron grabbed on the staff of the spear and held it in place as he flipped the sword in his hand, kicked the shield from the Warhammer's hand, and then plunged the blade into its chest just below the neck. Before ripping the spear from his side, crouching down and looking at the warhammer face to face. Aaron didn't utter a growl or cry as he took the sword and began to force the blade upwards through the neck. The warhammer titan then grabbed onto the sword as it tried to stop Aaron from pushing the sword any further. "Magath, how much longer till the divisions arrive?" Pike asked as they could only watch as the warhammer struggled against Aaron Yeager. "Not long now, they should be just coming up to the internment zone borders." Magath replied, "Even if Aaron Yeager eats the warhammer, he and the scouts will be outnumbered and they'll run out of bullets soon enough with the fire they've been raining on us. The alchemist, Edward, or Alphonse Elric are still somewhere though." Pike stated, "We still have to be careful." All at once a loud explosion just behind them caught their attention as they looked back to a colossal and towering wall of thick dark smoke, and just below it the orange flickers of a sea of fire, just outside the internment zone walls and into the city library proper. It was as if the very gates of hell had suddenly opened up. And then, almost simultaneously, the ubiquitous sound of lightning striking roared out as a flash of light streaked across the sky. Emma peered through the corner at the alleyway of the street as seemingly endless column of Marley troops grew closer and closer. She looked across her to see another scout hiding in an alleyway just opposite her. He nodded his head at her, she nodded back. She looked down and crouched below. In front of her was a transmutation circle, inside was written all the symbols of earth and rock. Oxygen, silicon, aluminium, iron, calcium, she listed off the elements in her head. Deep breaths, focus on your alchemy and visualize what you want to create. She could hear Alphonse's words in her head as he taught them. In a tense situation, it's easy to get distracted, but if you have any hope of doing anything, even surviving, you need to keep your focus. All is one and one is all. She muttered as she placed her hand on the symbol. The Marley soldiers were now passing through, and walking past her. The circle underneath her hand then began to glow a bright pale blue light as the ground they stood on rumbled, bring the Marley soldiers to a sudden halt as the sides of the road then began to curve upwards and the Marley troops disappeared from view from the wall of rock and stone. Emma turned to the ledge of the roof above and fired her hook up, reeling herself up to the roof. She climbed upwards to see the other scouts watching the Marley troops. She looked down. A long bowl trapped the Marley soldiers. She looked across the roofs to see her other comrades up too watching and then looking to her roof. And directly at Lieutenant Arlerd, who stood there quietly. "How many men are in there?" Armin asked. 300 was the estimate, sir," replied one of the scouts. There was a sullen expression on his face. 300. He raised his hand up, his index finger pressing against his thumb as he closed his eyes. "Emma, move towards squad leader Nanaba's position, block off the armored column's advance," he ordered with his eyes still kept on the trapped soldiers below. "Yes, Lieutenant," Emma replied. She looked back down to see the Marley soldiers now trying to escape as they tried to lift themselves over as some escaped and others tried to pull those still inside out. "I'm so sorry," Armin muttered. Then there was a click. A spark from his fingertips. Then hell opened up underneath the Marley soldiers as an ocean of fire swept across them. Against the roar of the fire was the screams of those below who were engulfed in the flames and the stench of burning meat. The heat was intense, akin to standing near a roaring bonfire. As Emma began to move away, she noticed the other scouts holding their noses and their breath, everyone except Armin, who turned away with his head looking at the ground with his eyes shut. Emma hopped across the roofs of the city. Just a couple streets down, she caught sight of the trucks of Marley soldiers on the road, and their vehicles stopped as the troops began to run onto the road, looking to the direction of the massive firestorm. On the roof she spotted the others, peering down at the soldiers below. She ran up to them and to Nanaba, saluting her. "Alchemist Battalion?" Nanaba asked. She nodded their heads. "Good, I need you to close up the road." She pointed further down the road. "Once that happens, fall back. Mina and the rest of us will mop up here." Emma looked over to the side to see Mina standing next to her, a single ponytail resting on her shoulder, her arms folded as he thumb rubbed against a silver ring on her index finger. "Yes, squad leader," Emma replied as she saluted Nanaba. She ran off to the ledge, jumping off and pulling herself through the air as she hopped from building to building before landing into an alleyway. She knelt down and quickly pulled out a piece of chalk, drawing a circle and then the details. Oxygen, silicon, aluminium, iron, calcium. Deep breaths, focus on your alchemy and visualize what you want to create. She muttered as she finished the circle. She put the chalk away before then placing her hand on the circle. A familiar blue light shone in front of her as the ground began to shake and recede underneath the feet of the Marley soldiers as formed into a large wall blocking off the main road and the entrances and paths around it. She stood up and fired the hook onto the roof of the building, reeling herself up and climbing over the ledge. She ran up to the edge and watched. A single scout jumped over the edge and over the street. Sparks of bright yellow light began to swarm her like fireflies as a bolt of lightning flashed from the sky and struck her. The cloud of smoke appeared for only just a second before it was blown away by the large Titan falling onto the road as it struck the ground with his hand crushing an armored vehicle. The other scouts on the ledge began to fire down on the Marley column. Emma watched as the disoriented Marley soldiers tried to fight back, shooting back at the scouts and the female Titan. The female Titan stomped on the trucks and armored cars, kicking groups of Marley soldiers around as a rapid storm of machine guns poured down on infantrymen armed only with bolt-action rifles. She looked over to the wall as Marley soldiers tried to find a way out, wedged between a rock and a Titan. Some escaped through the buildings and through the alleyways as the rest were massacred in their panic. She watched as some tried to ram the wall down with their trucks in a vain effort to escape. In her mind she could hear Alphonse's words again. It was back in that classroom. I want you all to understand. Even though you're all soldiers, alchemy is meant to be something for everyone, I mean everyone. He explained, for now the army, but someday for ordinary people, for now it's the people of Paradise but someday the world. Help me! Yelled one of the Marley soldiers as a truck crashed onto him, punted by the female Titan as it crashed into the wall squashing others. For now, maybe we use it to fight and destroy. The Marley soldiers, what was left, scattered wherever they could while whoever was left was the dead and dying under the shadow of the female Titan and the watching eyes of her comrades, just a grave of broken trucks and broken men. I hope that someday, you use your talents and what you learned not just to protect yourself from others but also to give to them. From a chunk of a wall, Falco watched as the Warhammer Titan struggled against Eren Yeager. As the blade almost reached to its throat, a massive spiral burst from the ground underneath the Warhammer and impaled them both as it lifted them into the air. Both their Titans went limp as they were suspended in the air. Whoa! Falco muttered as he watched in terrified awe at the sight. There was a gust of smoke from the nape of Eren's Titan before he was the shadow of a figure hop into the sky before an explosion of light appeared and a cloud of smoke was parted by the stature of a 15-meter Titan who landed on his knees and stood up, looking at the still impaled Warhammer Titan. Eren tired to reach out to the still captured Warhammer, his fingertips just out of reach. Eren looked down onto the ground, the sword still there. Picking up the blade he placed both of his Titan's hand on the grip as he pulled it back. Fire on him! Came an order. Falco recognized the voice instantly. Colonel Magath. He said as he looked up to the direction of the voice. A scattered grouping of gunfire followed as Marley troops and the Cart Titan Panzer unit tired to fire Eren. Instantly responding, the enemy troops fired back at Marley in another intense exchange of bullets. Falco began to run just on the edges of the battlefield, moving from cover to cover, as he continued to watch the battle. Under the hail gunfire the sound of glass shattering crept through as crystal began to form on Eren's neck and his hand as he covered his face, the bullets bouncing off the top of his hand as he swung the sword at the neck of the Warhammer. Falco, hiding behind a piece of wall, watched as Eren beheaded the Warhammer Titan from the base of its neck, picking up the head and shoving his hand into the neck before pulling out the insides. Falco covered his mouth at the horrible sight while Eren looked at the dissolving Titan flesh before tossing the smoking head aside. He killed her. Falco muttered out. Eren's Titan then turned to the stage after looking at the ground. His hands began to further harden with a crystal layer. The stage area exploded in an implosive of light as a Titan formed before them all, its bones rising from the ground as the flesh, muscle, and skin followed as the forming Titan stuck out its hand and formed a Warhammer in its palm. The Warhammer was back. The two Titans then quickly charged at each other, weapons in hands as they clashed together. The Titans pushed each other to the side as the gunfire continued to rain down. He got close to a small group of Marley soldiers trying to push forward. As he ran to them, they were cut down almost as quickly as they stepped away from the building. He ducked down onto the ground with his hands on his head. He looked up and peered towards the direction of the shots. In the lower windows of the building he spotted figures armed with guns pointing out from a window. He could barely make out the face but he saw eyes watching him. A hand point towards their arm. Falco looked towards his armband still firmly wrapped around. He looked back up to see the figure's hand clench into a fist as they placed it over their heart before quickly moving inside. Falco quickly reached the building, Marley soldiers ducking behind cover as the scouts still continued to fire on their positions. Falco ducked behind the pillar, as he waited out the hail of gunfire before quickly bolting for the door and running inside. The inside of the building was cramped with Marley soldier, standing, and injured, alive and dead. He ran up to one of the soldiers. "Where's Colonel Magath?" he asked. The soldier looked at him confused. "I'm a warrior candidate, I'm here to help." The soldier quickly then had a look of realization. "Upstairs on the roof with the cart titan," he said. Falco saluted the soldier before running up the stairs. Each level he looked out through the window and peered at the titan fight outside. Now people dressed in black began to swarm the titans as they dodged Marley's bullets and fired explosives at the warhammer as Aaron tried to wrestle the hammer from its hands. As Falco reached the roof he found dozens and dozens of troops running around, carrying supplies and belts of ammunition to the cart titan or lining the edge of the roof as they tried to fire back at the enemy troops who rapidly fired at them. A Marley soldier was shot in the head and quickly someone dragged their body to the side before another took their place on the wall. He spotted Magath, hidden behind the cart titan's leg. Falco ducked his head down as he ran towards Magath. "Colonel," he called out, catching his attention. Magath looked at him in shock. As Falco approached him, Magath grabbed him and pulled him behind the cart titan as bullets zipped by, picking off another Marley soldier. "Grice, what the hell are you doing here?" Magath questioned. "Are you hurt?" Magath then looked behind him and then back to the titans fighting. "Why isn't Vice Captain Braun out here?" Magath asked as he did. "No, Colonel, but he's just unresponsive," Falco replied, "but I don't know if he's injured or dying." "What happened to him? Were you attacked by the enemy?" Magath asked. "Sir, there's too much to say," he tried to reply. "We were held up by Aaron Yeager, then Edward Elric arrived, they argued, then the warhammer showed up." Magath looked at him confused. Falco didn't know what to tell Magath even as their words and actions flashed in his mind. "We're not here to start a war, the opposite, we want to prevent one." Okay. Magath said as he took in a deep breath. "We'll talk about this later, but right now, we need to know where Vice Captain Braun is. If we can get him in this fight we have a chance at recapturing this square." "Falco." Magath looked where Falco was pointing. "God damn it, we won't be able to reach him." Magath looked back to him. "Grice, how did you get through the gunfire?" Falco looked down as he thought back to the figure in the window that had gunned down the Marley soldiers, except him. Pointing to the armband, then placing the fist on the chest, as if there was an understanding that he wasn't aware of but which kept him alive. They just didn't fire on me. I saw one of them look at me and they just left me. Any soldier we sent out gets gunned down the second they step foot out of the building's perimeter." Magath said. He sighed deeply as he turned back to the stage. "Damn it all, maybe they aren't looking to kill civilians." He looked to Falco again. I'm sorry, I have to order this. Go find Gabby Braun, she should be near entrance to the internment zone." Falco nodded. He was about leave before Magath grabbed his arm. "Grice, stay out of the main street and if you see anything strange keep clear, good luck." Falco nodded before he ducked down and ran off back towards the stairs. Ed kept his head down as he peered through a crack in the debris. He watched as the Warhammer Titan was decapitated by Aaron's Titan and its head fall to the ground. "You're not there," Ed muttered to himself. He looked towards the ground, his eyes catching the mist trail which led back to the remains of the stage and the apartment complex whose front was now in tatters. Ed ducked his head as he ran towards the stage, trying to hide himself. He slid behind a large piece of rock, just in time as a new body of the Warhammer Titan rose from the ground, standing tall and new, angry and defiant as it formed a new weapon in its hand and charged towards Aaron. The Warhammer and Aaron clashed as Ed continued to crawl back to the stage. He spotted the familiar long pale white cord that was buried into the ground. "There you are," Ed said. He walked towards the entrance to the cord, surrounded by the chunks of the stage and the ruined buildings. He clapped his hands together and threw them onto the ground. The ground shook slightly and a rough sound of rocks scrapping against each other as large crystal was lifted from underneath the ground and out into the open. Ed looked at the large crystal before him, focusing on the woman inside its shell. Now looking at him. "Found you," he said with a smirk before quickly turned serious as he once more placed his hands together, flashes of blue light flickering around him. But before he could place his hands on the crystal and break through, the crystal exploded into a cloud of white. Ed hopped back quickly and landed onto his back away from the blast. He looked back up to see the crystal now covered in a cage whose bars were covered in small spikes. Ed quickly stood back up. "You cheating dash." He looked towards the Titans, the warhammer now focused on him as it pushed Aaron to the side. The warhammer raised its weapons above its head as it looked to crush Ed with the face of its hammer. Ed fires the hooks onto a nearby building as he quickly escaped the crashing blow of the hammer which struck onto his place. Flying into the air, Ed then fired his hooks onto the warhammer Titan and reeled himself towards her. The warhammer Titan quickly tried to intercept Ed, who broke off his path and then attached himself to the new crystal pillar. Ed clapped his hands, ready to transmute something from the crystal to battle the warhammer, when the Titan was struck by thunder spears from a lone scout. Explosions ripped through its neck. The warhammer Titan collapsed onto its knees as the scout landed next to Ed. "Mikasa," Ed said as the two looked at each other. "Great timing. Where's the rest of the squad?" "Escorting the defectors to the boats." Mikasa replied. "They should be heading here soon. There's still one more Marley convoy heading towards the internment zone. They'll be here soon." "Good, we can't spend any longer here," he said, looking around at the carnage. Gabby waved her arms as she pointed down to the street for the arriving Marley soldiers entering the internment zone through the gates. The soldiers trickled in, squads of troops entering through transport trucks. Gabby and the guards waved the trucks down, a few driving just next to them. "You need to reinforce the east checkpoint," Gabby informed them. "That position is low of troops." "Who are you?" the Marley soldier questioned, standing at the back of the transport truck, perplexed that an Eldian girl would be instructing him. Gabby tried to remain calm and composed at the Marley soldier looking down at her from the truck. "She's one of the warrior candidates. Magath sent her, so listen," said one of the guards. "Head to the eastern checkpoint." He was a little forceful in his voice. The Marley soldier stared at them. "Driver, head east." Gabby sighed out a breath she wasn't aware she was holding in. The trucks began to move into different streets. Gabby watched the entrance as more moved in. "The main columns of troops should be dash," the gate guard was interrupted. Then suddenly in the distance outside the gates, the sound of explosions was lifted into the air as the sound of fire, the roar of a mass of burning buildings, and the shrill cries of people quickly snuffed out. Then there was a bolt of lightning striking out across the sky, like a javelin thrown by a god, which struck the ground just a couple streets away from them as a distant echo of gunfire was heard. The three could only just watch as scattered troops ran into the internment zone for cover, running away from something behind them. "What is going on?" Gabby muttered. "Gabby!" came a yell from behind them. They turned around to see Falco running up to them. "Gabby! I'm glad I found you, but we need to head back right now," Falco said in between heavy gasps. "It's Reiner. He's hurt but he won't heal. We have to get to him." Gabby looked at him perplexed. Suddenly a troop transport truck passing by was blown up, exploding and killing all the men riding inside. They all ducked to the ground as more explosions crashed onto the ground in quick succession as it tore apart the Marley forces. As the explosions subsided, gunfire quickly followed. From the ground looking up, Gabby saw flashes of light from the rooftops firing down at the Marley troops in disarray. "Fuck!" yelled one of the gate guards. They stood up from the ground and then smashed the butt of their rifle into a glass window. "You kids get inside," he ordered as the other lifted them into the building. Gabby was picked up and thrown inside, as was Falco, as the gate guards turned to return fire at the enemy. One of the gate guards was struck in the head, their body crashing into the wall as they slumped down dead. "No!" yelled the other. Suddenly there was gunfire coming from the street. The guard turned to fire at them but was shot through the stomach, stumbling through the broken glass and into the building with Gabby and Falco. Gabby quickly crawled to him, wanting to help him. She looked up, looking through the smashed glass at the silhouette of the enemy above, the darkness covering them. "Area clear." Suddenly the enemy forces standing on the building rappelled down onto the ground. Gabby crawled towards the wall and peered over the edge of the shattered window. The enemy forces of Paradise were dressed in black with metal rods armed with strange-looking guns. "Gabby!" Falco yelled in a loud whisper. "Get back here, we have to leave." He tried to wave her here but she stayed put watching them. Suddenly one of the enemy soldiers passed through the window, looking in and instantly spotting Gabby. They both looked at each other as Gabby sat frozen in place. The woman in front of her was armed with what looked like a rifle. She dressed in a black uniform with small metal pieces on her front with a symbol of white and blue wings on it. Gabby stared into her brown eyes as she held her breath, waiting for the woman to point the gun at her and fire. "Clear here, enemy soldier taken down," the woman said. "That's two more for you, Sasha," said a voice nearby. The woman left, turning her back on Gabby as she ran off. Gabby peered further as she watched plain-clothed people jog through the street picking up Marley rifles as the Paradise soldiers around directed them elsewhere. And in the center, a man draped in a dark green cloak watched around directing the enemy forces. "My team, head towards the center," he ordered. "The rest of you, head to the evacuation point." He pointing a handle into the sky as a hook was fired from his waist and pulled himself up and out of her sight as the others followed. Suddenly the gate guard coughed out weakly, catching their attention. "Mr. Gate Guard," Gabby whispered loudly. "You kids, get out of here." The gate guard. Gabby stood up and looked around. The street was now empty save for the wrecked transport trucks and dead bodies. She opened the door and stepped outside, her foot stepping on a rifle. She picked up the weapon, pulling back the bolt and checking inside. Still a few shots left. Falco followed her. He walked out a bit and headed towards the body of a person dressed in ordinary clothes. He looked down and picked something off of the person Gabby. Falco called out but Gabby didn't listen. Instead she began to walk off, heading into the direction of the enemy. "Gabby!" Falco yelled out as he chased after her. Gabby looked back at Falco and then began to run off down the road after the plain-clothed people who were working with the enemy. Traitors! Murderers! They'll pay for this. Pike could only watch as the Warhammer Titan was swarmed by the Scout Regiment, throwing long projectiles at them which exploded and pushed it around, all while Ehrenjäger and now one of the Elrics launched their attack, tipping the scales on an already uneven battle in their favor. The Warhammer tried to strike Ehrenjäger as he tried to take the crystal holding the holder of the Titan. The Warhammer misses its target as Eren dodges the attack. Leaving itself open, a fist from the large crystal spiral struck the Warhammer in the ribs, knocking it to its knees as Eren then tackles the Warhammer to the ground. Scout soldiers then swarmed the crystal, firing their projectiles at it. The long spears explode but the crystal holds. Pike internally sighs in relief. "Colonel, we need to send a contingent of troops to protect the Warhammer," she said. "The enemy cannot be allowed to capture them. We need to get men past this battlefield." Magath replied, "Every team we send out is getting gunned down if they aren't in cover or stomped on by Ehrenjäger." Magath looks back. "Those Dem reinforcements should be here." He clenches his fist. "Unless the Demmed enemy got to them first. We have to assume they have." Pike responded, "If you were them then you'd do the same thing, cutting off reinforcements to control the battlefield. We have to assume they may have surrounded us in our own city." Magath commented in disgust, "If the enemy was here to capture the warriors then we have to assume they have a method of escape, but whatever they have can't get past our navy. We have to take the chance. Even if our own reinforcements are halted we are still on our own field." Pike pointed out, "If we can stop them from securing their objectives and possibly slow them down, further reinforcements will overwhelm the enemy." Pike continued to analyze the battlefield. "Also the loss of War Chief Jaeger has hurt our offensive capabilities. Then we'll take that chance. Only way to fight back." Magath said, "Pike, have the Panzer unit cover our advance. I'll take whatever men we can spare and secure the Warhammer Titan." Magath headed towards the entrance and down the stairs, a few other soldiers following them. "We all have to hurry." Pike thought if those attacks are anything to go by then the enemy has brought some of their greatest assets to the battlefield. Her mind flashed back to the battle on Paradise 4 years ago, her own encounter with an enemy alchemist and bursts of fire that scorched her Titan just from the click of their fingers. You're here, aren't you?" Without warning, one of her pods exploded instantly killing her teammate No. Pike yelled out. Suddenly explosions struck from behind them. The cart Titan moved around to see the enemy had now ambushed them from behind. "They're everywhere," yelled of the Marley soldiers as the scouts swarmed them from the sky picking them off. Long spears were fired down at Pike as they tried to hit her. tearing apart the roof of the building in the process. Pike tried to keep moving, dodging their attacks as the two pods attached to her tried to return fire from an enemy that now had them totally surrounded. The next pod was struck with a spear, blowing up and almost pushing her off the ledge. "No, not again!" she yelled out, not in anger but frustration. "Everyone, get out of her dash!" Suddenly there was a touch of heat just across her neck before a massive implosion of fire which threw her off the building. She fell and crashed into the ground of an empty street, the final pod and panzer unit crushed underneath her. The cart titan's body lay broken and battered. She tried to stand as a lone soldier jumped from the roof. More followed behind them with guns pointed at her. Pike's eyes fixed onto the soldier leading them. There was a disgusting familiarity about him, and his gloves. "You!" Pike growled as she tried to stand on her mangled legs. "This is for last time, Pike," the soldier said before clicking their fingers. Instantly the air within her mask grew hotter than an explosion of flames tore apart her face, blinding her. Then there was a sharp pain, not the kind experienced inside a titan but real pain. She felt her arms being sliced apart from her body as someone pulled her from the titan. She emerged from the nape screaming out in pain as she was thrown down onto the ground to be held down by enemy soldiers. She felt the cut of a needle into her nape. It felt cold and her body began to shut down as she weakly tried to escape from the clutches of the enemy. "Tie up her legs, bring her to the evacuation point," a voice ordered behind her as she shut her eyes and drifted away in darkness. Ed, still handing off the spiral pillar, looked to the building where Marley had set its stronghold. The Marley soldiers were in disarray running away from the battlefield as the cart titan had fallen off the building and out of his sight, the rest of Petra's squad now moving in to mop up any remaining resistance. The Warhammer titan batted Eren away with her warhammer, striking the butt of the hammer against the sword Eren held. "This is my chance," he said. "Mikasa, I'm going for the warhammer, you get Eren." Mikasa nodded as the two jumped off the spiral. Ed fired his cables onto a nearby building as he swung himself towards the crystal. As he flew through the air he turned to see Eren striking down the warhammer, burying the sword into the warhammer's shoulder as he kicks the warhammer down. The warhammer tried to get up quickly and tackle Eren but was knocked down by the explosion of a thunder spear from Mikasa. Eren then turned his head to the crystal, throwing himself at the trapped holder. "No!" Ed yelled, as he pressed the trigger to his gear, a burst of smoke propelling him forward as both he and Eren raced towards the holder. And Eren reached her first. His titan hand grasping at the cage which the holder had protected itself in as the spikes around it cut deep into its hand, Ed pulled up and avoided crashing into Eren's titan as he fired his hooks onto the ruined building and hung from it. "Eren, don't!" he yelled. Eren looked at Ed for a second before the fingers and knuckles on his free hands hardened with crystal and he smashed his fist against the cage breaking it, widening his mouth as he prepared to bite down into the crystal and eat the Warhammer Titan. Ed pulled out the blades in his scarab, ready to leap from the wall and go for Eren when his Titan suddenly shuddered as it let out a loud gasp. It fell to the ground lifeless. As the crystal rolled out of its hand, Ed looked to see Levi holding Eren as other scouts swarmed him. Ed let a deep sigh as he detached the hooks from the wall and fell to the floor. He landed near the crystal, not free from the cage it used to protect itself from Ed. He looked at the woman inside who looked back at Ed. He tapped on the crystal with his knuckle. "Hope you aren't too cozy in there," he said mockingly. Ed looked up to see someone approaching them. "Captain Levi," she said. "So this is the Warhammer Titan, huh?" he said looking down at her too. "Not so tough without your fake alchemy Titan to help you," he mocked in a cold tone. "Open the crystal up," Levi ordered. Ed clapped his hands together and placed them onto the crystal. Blue sparks of light and electricity formed around him as the crystal then shattered into a million small pieces and the holder fell onto it, their clothes soaking in a clear liquid which was inside with them. "Arg!" she cried. Ed knelt down quickly and apprehended her, standing her up and holding her arms behind her back as Levi punched her in the face, dazing her. "That was for Shiganshina," Levi said. "That's twice we kicked your ass," Ed said as held her, "and if you were smart you'll learn from that." A few other scouts ran towards them and handcuffed the holder and they injected her with a tranquilizer, knocking her out as they placed a blindfold over her. He then spotted the other group and they escorted a handcuffed Eren with them. "Gabby, stop," Falco said chasing after her. Gabby ran towards a street corner. There she spotted someone just walking past. She ran to them and stopped at the turn, peering through the corner. She saw the people rush into a building as the enemy forces led them inside as others took watch. "Gabby, we have to go back," Falco said, grabbing her shoulder. "It's not safe here, if they see us then dash." "Hey!" called out a voice from above them. They looked up to see a person fall from the sky and land onto the ground as puffs of smoke slowed their fall. Gabby almost raised the rifle in her hand at it before Falco grabbed her arm. Gabby noticed the guns attached to their suit and the rest of their gear and equipment. "Who are you?" She looked at Gabby, holding the Marley rifle. "We're with you guys," Falco said quickly, waving his arms in front of him. He then showed her something. Gabby looked at it. A badge made into the symbol of a tree was held up. She's with me, she's my sister." "What are you doing here then?" the enemy soldier asked, perplexed. "Shouldn't you be with the other groups?" "We got lost, luckily we found you guys," Falco lied, rubbing the back of his head. "Oh, you must been with one of the other groups," the soldier said. They pointed them to the building. "There's an escape tunnel there, your group's probably gotten to the harbor already." "The harbor? Thanks," Falco says as he pushes Gabby along. The enemy soldier then fired a cord from the arm and flew away. Falco quickly put the badge on. Oh God, Falco says as he and Gabby walk towards the building. "How are we going to get out of this?" "Falco, I'm going to follow them," Gabby whispered. "Are you crazy?" he questioned. "We can't follow them, we have to get out of here and get back to Dash." As they walked up to the door, an enemy soldier jogged to them and placed his hand up, halting them. Gabby almost raised her rifle at them, thinking their cover had been found out. "Wait for a second." The soldier then looked over to the side as more of them jumped off the roof and onto the ground, running to them. As they came closer, both Gabby and Falco noticed two people being carried on their backs. As they got closer, they both gasped involuntarily, noticing Pike being carried on their shoulder and another following just behind. They passed through the door quickly with the other troops. "All right, come through and hurry." Gabby rushed to the door, running in to catch up with Pike. Falco followed her. "The cart tighten. We have to save Pike." As they entered the building, they found more enemy soldiers. "It's in the back." One of them pointed. "You kids watch your step." They were led to a staircase heading down. They ran down the stairs into a cellar to find a large and cleanly made tunnel just on the cellar wall. Gabby looked at it almost amazed, wondering how the enemy could even have done this without them noticing. She felt a bit apprehensive, but she ran into the tunnel with Falco following them. As they went through, they met with another enemy soldier through there. They pointed, "Follow the rope." They both walked up to the piece of rope lying on the floor and a symbol carved onto the floor. They walked alongside it through the dimly lit tunnels, walking for what must have been a while, and as they passed through, noticing different tunnels connected to the main tunnel, before turning into a sharp corner and into another tunnel. "How did they do this?" Gabby asked. The walls of the tunnel were cleanly cut and unnatural. "Is this alchemy?" Falco didn't say anything at first. "I think it is," he replied. "I think we're probably outside the internment zone by now. It's like what Willie said, they can manipulate the elements." Gabby said. She thought back to the rest of the play. The servants of the devil, the champions of the evil Eldians on that island. Falco looked around. Why did they make the tunnels like this? He observed. Further down the tunnel, there were two other entrances going to the side. It went on for a while, but it started to curve around. As they continued to walk, they passed by a tunnel going straight for what seemed to be miles. "It feels like the inside of a maze now." Chapter 60, The Cost of Battle. Alphonse hugged the strap of his rifle close to him as he walked down the docks of Liberio. All around him an army of sailors, soldiers, and workmen ran around, the urgency and clambering of hundreds, maybe thousands of people on the main port of Liberio. Alphonse kept his head looking down. Maybe it was to hide his face from them and prevent his discovery. Maybe he just couldn't look at the faces of the people he devised to help kill. "Is everyone in position?" Alphonse asked, whispering almost. "They should be. Battleships are being manned now," Onyankopon told him. "If everything goes to plan, then this will be a massive success." He then pointed forward. "Come on, we should hurry, the ships will encircle the harbor." They started to jog, weaving through the different people while trying to keep their heads down. Alphonse tilted his head up slightly at the swarmed docks and flood of faces. He stared at their worried and serious faces for only a second. It made his stomach churn and his head hurt. Just keep going, don't think about it. Through the mass of faces, he saw a few familiar ones. Looking at him and then nodded their heads in acknowledgement before they boarded onto the large battleships docked. Then there was an echo, a distant click, which caught everyone's attention. Alphonse turned his head to see, along with almost everyone in the harbor, as the flicker of fire peered over the buildings and the flash of thunder. Alphonse clenched the strap of his rifle tighter as Onyankopon hurried him along. Quickly, we don't have a lot of time. Alphonse nodded his head as they continued to jog out of the harbor. This is the best option. As they slipped through, the crowd of sailors and soldiers now growing thinner and thinner as they entered the street surrounded by buildings. They continued to run. As they moved through, Marley troops passed them by. They were panicked as some ran down the street in shock, wounded being dragged down the street by their comrades or worse. Alphonse caught the familiar scent of cooked meat being carried through the air. As they continued their approach, the smell grew unbearably stronger as he tried not to gag, holding his breath. The sound of a roaring fire almost drowned out everything else, except the sound of screams and crying from Marley soldiers that passed them by. As they passed a corner, Alphonse turned his head to see a scattered group of Marley soldiers in front of a large wall with the unmistakable scratching of alchemy on it. Some sat on the group weeping into their hands, some stood looking at the wall like statues while few vomited onto the ground. Don't look, keep moving. Onyankopon urged, we have a job to do. Alphonse continued to follow him until they stopped at a small shop with blacked-out windows, wedged in between two buildings. Straight down, Alphonse could see the walls of the internment zone. This is the halfway point. He knocked on the door 9 times. The doors opened to reveal a group of scout soldiers pointing their guns at the door, quickly lowering it to the ground when they saw them. The two entered. The scouts quickly shut the door and assumed their defensive positions, hiding behind cover as they pointed their guns at the door. Captain Elric, squad leader Hang is at the lower levels. The scout said, the members of the Alchemist Battalion are back from their assignments with the other teams too. Good. Alphonse replied while letting out a sigh, thank you. The scout saluted him as he quickly made his way to the basement, going down the stairs. The entire building was dark with only the slight light seeping through the windows. The basement was lit up by candles in a torch. Standing by the large hole in the wall was Hang. But standing by her side was a 10-person line of people he had come to know well, the alchemists he had trained. He walked to first. Emma, good to see you're okay, he said to the woman standing. Jacob, good to see you survived too. Isaac, Olivia. He greeted them all, happy to see his students had made it through the battle. Then he searched the line again. Where's Joseph? They all suddenly turned solemn. Joseph, he was shot, sir, during a skirmish. Jacob replied. Alphonse shut his eyes and clenched his fists tightly. Why did this? He felt a hand grab his shoulder and squeeze. He looked to see Hang next to him. I understand how you must be feeling. We can mourn the losses soon, but we still have people depending on us. Hang turned to Onyankopon. Is everyone ready? Yes, they should have infiltrated the battleships already. He replied, once Irwin makes his appearance, the waves from the explosion should cover the harbor and push the ships inland. He turned to Alphonse. There should be a small hole above you when that happens. When water starts to rush out onto the floor, then do your thing. Alphonse nodded his head while looking at the ground. Yeah. He replied weakly. This is for the best, Alphonse. The other options would put more innocent people's lives at risk. Hang assured him. You should be proud of the idea you and Armin came up with. Why should I be proud? I just wish we could have thought of something else. I know, thank you, Hang. He replied, looking at her. She nodded her head back at him. The rest of the team should be at the evacuation point by now. With any luck they're on a boat heading to the ship right now. Hang stated. The others and I will head to the other positions in this giant transmutation circle. Hang tapped Alphonse on the shoulder. Good luck, Al. Alphonse nodded. Both Alphonse and Onyankopon jogged into the tunnel, dimly lit up by the glowing crystals from the rice chapel underground. Follow me, I know where the center is. They passed through the tunnels, taking turn after turn until they came upon a tunnel with a line of rope on the ground. As they continued to jog through, the sound of two people speaking echoed around the chambers before falling silent as Alphonse and Onyankepon's own footsteps interrupted them. As they entered the conjoining tunnel, Alphonse turned to see children, probably just a bit younger than when he met his friends all those years ago, standing before him. One was a girl dressed in nice clothes with long black hair covered in dust hiding her face, carrying a rifle in her hands. And the other a young boy standing next to her with light blonde hair and honey-colored eyes, looking at him mouth agape. The girl was about to say something before the boy covered her mouth. "Si sir, it's a honored to me meet you." The boy stammered, as if he knew who Alphonse was, talking to him with the nervousness of how they would have greeted the President Bradley all those years ago. "Come on, Alphonse," Onyankopon reminded him, grabbing his shoulder. "Greet your followers another time." Alphonse flashed him a dirty look for the remark before continuing to follow him. As he looked back, he saw those two children look back at him as he ran down the tunnel. A small lone boat gently floated towards the harbor. Erwin, sitting on a small wooden box, could make out the buildings in the distance and the flickering of lights that covered the city of Liberio. He took a deep breath, holding it in for a few seconds, before letting out a deep sigh as he continued to row the small boat closer. The Marley battleships were now in view and he could just about make out the small figures running around on the docks now. He stopped the oars of his boat and looked out onto the view before him. Beautiful. He wondered what his father would make of it, the sight of a city outside the walls and just past that an entire continent of people. It was all he could think of whenever he traveled beyond Paradise, his father's now accomplished dream. He looked down at his hand, a massive cut displayed on his palm, wiping away the smile he didn't know he had on his face. Right. He gripped his hand, the blood being squeezed from the cut and dripping slightly onto the boat. "Keep to the plan, we're not finished yet, far from it." He looked back at the harbor and Liberio. "It's time." Once more he took in a deep breath, filling his lungs, as if getting ready to make a plunge into the sea. He envisioned his Titan standing in the waters as a wave swallowed the harbor, dragging the ships inland. Bright yellow sparks and flickers of light seemed to flow around him until from above there was a roar of thunder as the dark night sky above him opened up and struck the tiny boat and himself. There was an almost colossal explosion of light and force from the epicenter of the strike. A wave of water was pushed out, climbing higher and higher till it threatened to just reach into the sky itself as it raced towards the harbor. As Erwin's body was formed and connected into the ungodly mass of flesh and muscle, he could make out the sound of sirens and the very distant echoes of screams before the sound of an almighty crash conquered all dissent. As he looked through the eyes of the colossal Titan, his chest high, surrounded by the ocean and steam, where he had once saw a harbor, ships, people, and the lights of the city outskirts. There was now nothing but water engulfing the landscape, as the battleships of Marley were pushed inwards, crashing into buildings. Then a bright blue light began to shine through the city, like an underwater show of crystal lights, as the shape of a circle surrounded area that was still engulfed in water. Then in the blink of an eye, everything he could see was then covered in a thick cloud of fog which had now engulfed the harbor and the city in a field of gray. Then what followed was a boom, an explosion, the sound of a battleship's cannon firing its shell. Erwin spotted the streak of yellow light pass through the mist before striking something else inside the fog. Then another shell, then another, till the whole area was alit with flashes of light as it tore through the mist, striking at targets they could not see in a completely disorganized and chaotic fashion. "The fog of war?" Erwin asked. "It's a saying made by a general in the Marley army once." Onyankopon explained, "It's meant to refer to how in war and fighting we don't know everything and things are uncertain, that no matter how prepared you are you just don't know what will happen. That's the entire history of the Scout Regiment," Levi remarked. "A wise saying," Erwin replied. "Though it can be said our entire existence is shrouded in a fog. I imagine this isn't what was in mind." As the cannon fire continued, a rapid series of explosions followed with it, as the sound of a demolition entered into his ears. Even blinded by the mist in front of him, Erwin knew that the once bright view before him was being torn apart by Marley and Paradis hands, at his orders. This was not he had envisioned. In his mind he had hoped for a day when he would walk into Marley along with Historia, Darius, and the other officials of Paradis as they, backed by nations and allies around the world, as they proclaimed their intent for peace and gained the respect their sovereignty deserved. He wondered if this would be the last time he saw Liberio. He wondered the situation he would find himself in if that were to happen. He didn't know how long he watched that fog and listened to the cannon fire and explosions, but he stood there watching. The loud hum of a motor engine behind him, Erwin focused himself as he pushed his reel out of the massive nape of the colossal. Bursting through the flesh, he looked down to see a boat filled with scout troops and volunteers dressed in Marley uniform greeted him. He hopped off the colossal titan, its body lurching forward slightly, as he landed onto the body with the gas of his ODM gear braking his fall. Erwin. Hang called out, the first to greet him as she walked up to Erwin. I don't think I'll ever get used to seeing you in that big thing, she said before then turning to the smoking colossal titan. I'd call you lucky if not for the, well you know. Erwin gave her a tired smile, still a curious one at heart. Hang. He replied, his face became sterner. Has everyone been evacuated? The last of the boats have already left and are on their way as we speak. Hang replied. And Alphonse, is he with you? Erwin asked. Alphonse is sitting behind deck. He wants to be alone for now, so best give him some space. Hang replied. Of course, I think we all have a lot to think about after this. Erwin said, a lot to prepare for. What was that explosion just then? Gabby said as they turned their heads back in the direction of the blast. Why could we hear it from down here, unless dash? Oh, you kids! Yelled a person in front of them. An enemy soldier stood by the exit of the tunnels. Come on, get your asses moving. They urged them. The two quickly sprinted towards the exit. Just as they were passing through, suddenly around them the tunnels began to light up in a bright blue glow surrounding the walls. An intense feeling of fight or flight took over Gabby as she began to sprint out, believing her life was now at risk. She leaps out of the tunnel entrance and onto the floor as Falco ran out. The enemy soldier at the entrance began to laugh at her. Calm down, it's only alchemy, they said. They then pointed upwards. Get moving, you're the last ones out. Gabby and Falco quickly ran upstairs. Gabby turning around back towards the entrance, still in terrified awe at what she had just witnessed. That guy back there, it was him, one of the brothers Willie Tiber talked about. Her voice was shaking slightly. She turned to Falco. Falco, how did you know it was him? She asked, remembering how quickly he covered her mouth and greeted him. His brother. I met him, he was in Liberio. Falco admitted. He was there with Aaron Yeager, Reiner, and I was caught in the middle of them. Gabby gasped, stopping Falco as they reached the top of the stairs. You said Reiner was hurt. Did they hurt him? Gabby asked sternly. She gripped his arm tightly. No, they didn't hurt. I don't even know what happened or how to explain it. Falco replied. Reiner knew who they were during his time on the island, and Aaron Yeager and Edward Elric. They just argued with each other almost the whole time. Edward said dash. Did he do it? Gabby questioned. Edward Elric, he was there, he must have created that explosion. The image of the explosions and the colorful smoke re-entered her mind. An attack on her home. I don't know, I don't think so. Falco replied. He was just as surprised as us when it happened. I think Aaron Yeager was the one who planned it. Falco then grabbed Gabby's wrist. We have to move, he said. Gabby snapped back to reality. Right, we still have to save Pike, she replied. Before Falco could protest, she quickly ran out of the door. Stepping out, she found herself in a small hallway leading to an open door. Outside was a large open space surrounded by large walls. The two quickly stepped out to find themselves into an empty warehouse. By the wide entrance of the warehouse stood two enemy soldiers armed with guns, one of them waving at Gabby and Falco to hurry along. Gabby quickly jogged over to them as Falco followed her. Down the docks, the enemy soldier said, pointing. Was there anyone else behind you guys? No, we're the only ones, Gabby replied, lying. She didn't know, and even if they were, she needed to get to where Pike was. Fast. All right, get going, they said, pointing to the nearby staircase outside just past the street. The two rushed out towards the stairs, the ocean on the horizon past the low chain fence over the edge. As they reached the stairs, they looked over the edge to see two fishing boats on the shore of the beach crowded with people dressed in regular clothes. Gabby runs down the stairs, watching the boat as she tries to find Pike. They ran up to the boat. She slings the rifle around her back as a ladder is thrown down from the side of the boat. Both Gabby and Falco step into the water. Gabby climbs first, hopping over the side and onto the boat before then helping Falco up. "Is that everyone?" yelled the driver on the edge of the boat. "Looks like it." The enemy soldier yelled back, "Only the volunteers, Hang Squad, and Alphonse are left, head back to the ship." The driver gave the soldier a thumb up before walking back to the steering wheel, turning on the engine and began turning the boat. The engine hummed low as it quickly grew louder and louder as the boat started to first crawl slowly before picking up momentum until it skated across the water. Gabby looked around at the people on the boat. They were all just regular Eldians like her, some of them she had seen on the street walking by before. There were even kids younger than her. But that's not caught her eye. Some of those people on the boat wore that pin, the tree badge which Falco picked up. Some grabbed onto it, displaying it proudly and laughing. "We're back." One of them yelled, "Marley can't get us now. Those bastards thought they'd had turned us all into titans all those years ago, but we're back." Another replied, celebrating. Falco moved closer to Gabby and grabbed her sleeve. "Stay quiet and don't attract attention," he muttered. "Hey, look!" yelled a child, said, pointing out to the back. Everyone rushed to the back of the boat as the sight of the colossal titan standing chest high in the ocean as the water around it turned to steam. And beyond the colossal titan was an endless cloud, a thick gray fog, which had consumed Liberio as the sight of blinking yellow lights through the fog flew by and explosions echoed out. At the sight, almost everyone cheered out and fired their guns in the air in a roaring celebration. "The first blow to Marley." One yelled, "Eldia's first victory. Eldia will rise once more." Another yelled, "Eren Yeager will lead us to victory. The Elric brothers will bring Marley's might to heal. Nothing will stop us." There was hugging, cheering, and crying joyously at the sight of this humiliating defeat for Marley. Almost everyone, except for two others who stood back and watched the others to celebrated their defeat. Gabby could do nothing more than hold back her anger and resist the urge to reach for her rifle and fire at the traitors to the motherland. "Oi, we've reached the ship!" yelled the driver, catching their attention. They all looked back to see a large ship approaching them, a Marley destroyer which was surrounded by fishing boats similar to the one they were on. "That's where she is," Gabby muttered the Falco. The people ran towards the front of the boat, waving at the people standing on the deck. "Wave the flag!" yelled one of the people. A child ran back towards the bow of the boat, moving past Gabby and Falco, before then quickly running back with a green flag. "What's that?" Gabby said out loud. The child stopped and looked at them wide-eyed but with an even wider smile, excited to tell someone about something they're crazy about. "It's the Scouts' flag." The child ran back and handed them the flag. The people at the front took hold of the flag and tried to fly it. A silver shield with a cross on it and white and blue wings decorating the front. Gabby watched the enemy's flag, the Scouts, fly proudly in the clutches of traitors and evil Eldians. It took almost everything in her body not to point the rifle at them and firing. Pike slowly began to open her eyes to a hazy white light in front of her. Her senses began to return to her as she felt the hard and cold surface she lay against. As her vision began to clear, she could make out the light above her and the humming of pipes and the metallic echo of footsteps against a metal floor. "Ship. I'm on a ship." She turned her head to the side to be greeted to metal bars in front of her and the blurry image of a person dressed in smart clothes watching her. As her vision cleared further, she could make out the clothes that man wore. Then his pale blonde beard. Then his glasses. She narrowed her eyes at the man in front of her as she now stared at his face. "Zeke," she grumbled out loud. "I should have known you betrayed us." Her former captain looked at her. She quickly realized she didn't have her arms, her limbs still regenerating. However, as she tried to move, her body could only weakly flinch and kick her legs, which rattled the chains attached to her ankles. "I guess I have a lot of explaining to do, Pike," Zeke said to her in a calm and mannerly tone. The boy wonder, always a mystery to the higher UPS, a complete enigma. Pike said, "What did Paradis give you to betray us? Or is this part of some grand scheme of yours?" "Well, it's both. They have to give me something in order for me to follow through with a grand scheme," he joked in an almost serious manner. "But if you want to know, I'm doing this for everyone. I meant what I said about the perilous situation that us Eldians face, and I intend on making sure that we avoid a horrible fate." "Rebuild the Eldian Empire?" Pike asked. "Is that what you plan to do?" Who knows? Zeke replied, all I want is for Eldians to be free. Suddenly there was a rush of footsteps heading down the hallway. Zeke walked forward and leaned into the bars as 3 scouts carrying what looked like a woman in a dark fancy dress hurried by. A thin trail of smoke following them. The Warhammer Titan. She gasped. What do you plan on doing? Are Reiner and Porco on here too? She asked, interrupting herself as a current of thoughts and questions crashed against her. Those two? No, he replied, we can't have it all, I'm afraid. Zeke shrugged his shoulders. I'm sure Commander Erwin will be disappointed, a dent in his plans. Though, capturing you, the Warhammer and I is an impressive haul of a raid on enemy territory. He commented, I'm sure the Mid-East Alliance would have sacrificed thousands of men for a result like that. There was another set of footsteps approaching them as another figure arrived in front of her. One she had come to quickly recognize. Zeke Yeager. The fire alchemist said, looking at him, Commander Erwin and the others are at the bridge, they will speak to you now. The alchemist then turned to look at her as she looked at him. Pike Finger, the card titan. He said, so this is what you look like outside of your titan. So you're the guy who keeps trying to light me on fire, you haven't changed that much. Pike replied, was it you who set the buildings on fire outside of the internment zone? She questioned, remembering the flickering flames of the tall fires she spotted before the strike of lightning. I didn't set the buildings on fire. He replied, pausing for a few seconds, I was stopping your reinforcements from advancing into the internment zone. Pike clenched her teeth, knowing the implications of his answer. I don't have time to answer your questions, another time maybe. He said, walking away to the side. Pike looked back to Zeke, who shrugged his shoulders. Goodbye, Pike, hopefully I'll see you soon. He said as she turned away, you should get some rest, you know how long the journey to Paradise can be. Ed looked out the windows of the bridge and towards the seemingly endless plain of ocean. In his hand he held the pocket watch, gripping it tight as he thought back of home and resemble in a repair shop that was introduced by a dirt path and low stone wall surrounded by endless fields of green. He thought of Winry, Grandma, and their home all waiting for them, him. He turned his head. Next to him, Aaron stood beside him quietly looking out of the window too, with his hands handcuffed as Mikasa stood behind him watching. Ed turned away and back to the window. He thought of Alphonse, looking to the door for a brief second, wondering when he'd walk through and what he would say to him, what they would say to each other. Ed let out a sigh and shut his eyes for a second as a feeling of resignation washed over him. He thought of Commander on deck. Came a call as the door opened. The crew quickly stood up from the seats and turned to the door, standing straight. Ed copied them, mimicking them and their actions while Aaron stood still looking at the door. In steps Erwin, who then stands before them. The crew placed a clenched fist over the chest, saluting him. At ease, back to your posts. He ordered calmly as he walked in further. Behind him followed Hang, then Levi, then Nanaba and then Alphonse. Ed called out slightly. Alphonse looked back at him with a straight expression and the two locked eyes for a second. Ed, brother. Alphonse replied back as a weak smile formed on his lips. The two walked up to each other and embraced, almost hesitantly. As they pulled back, they stepped back a bit. How are you? Alphonse asked. I'm doing well. Ed replied. Alphonse nodded his head before then turning to Aaron. He turned to Mikasa, standing beside Aaron. Mikasa, it's good to see you're unharmed. He said as he hugged her. Thank you, Alphonse. Mikasa replied as the two pulled away. I'm glad you're okay too. Alphonse then turned to a stony expression appearing on his face. Aaron. Alphonse. Aaron replied. He turned to Ed before then looking back to Alphonse as if waiting for Ed to ask something. Ed looked back at Aaron glaringly. You're not going to ask? Ed sighs through his nose as he looks back at Alphonse. Another time then. Oi, Aaron. Called a voice. They turned to see Levi walking up to them, focusing on Aaron. You look like shit. He said. Captain Levi. Aaron said. Levi then grabbed Aaron by his collar and pulled him down as he kicked Aaron in the stomach. Aaron collapsed onto his knees. Mikasa almost jumped into action before both Alphonse held her back and Ed stepped in her way. Ed shook his head while Alphonse looked down to the floor as Levi began to repeatedly kick Aaron. Get up, Yeager. Levi commanded as he stopped, "You have some explaining to do." "Everything I needed to say I said through the letters." Aaron raised his head up towards Levi as he composed himself. "I thought you all would have read them." As Levi walked away, Alphonse let go of Mikasa as Ed stepped back onto place. Mikasa helped Aaron up onto his feet as Erwin and the other squad leaders huddled around him. "Where's Petra?" Ed asked, noticing her absence. "Squad leader Petra is tasked with keeping the defectors and informants." Erwin replied, the marks of Titan shifting still slowly healing, along with the rest of Levi's squad and her team. He then turned his head to Aaron. "An entire network we spent the good part of a year building, now compromised. I am sorry for ruining the efforts of the regiment, that was never my intention," Aaron said. "And yet here we are." Nanaba replied this time. "Marley or the other nations will probably be terrified about a massive transmutation circle underneath the city." Heng stated, "If Eldians injected with Zeke's spinal fluid can take down a city overnight, then alchemy can do that too, and with fewer men." Speaking of Zeke Yeager, Erwin then turned to Ed. "Edward, how has your scouting work on Zeke been going?" "There's still some conclusions I need to draw up, but I think I've got his life before and when he became a warrior organized." Ed replied, "I'll write up my findings within the next week or two of landing." "Good," Erwin replied. Suddenly there was a knock on the door as the hatch turned and metal door screeched. "Commander, I have Zeke Yeager," Armin said, stepping through as Zeke walked behind him. "Speak of the devil," Erwin muttered to those nearby. "Hello everyone," Zeke said, "nice to see you all made it back alive." Ed looked around the room. It wasn't hard picking up on the angry glances from the crew or staff on board as they looked at him. Looking at the squad leaders, most had a stony calm expression on their faces while Nanaba glared at him. "I can see, still a lot of hard feelings here," Zeke commented as he walked up to them, "but I hope we can get past this dash." Nanaba suddenly grabbed Zeke by his collar and kept him back, holding him at literal arm's length. As she raised her metal hand ready to punch him, "You should count yourself lucky we don't kill you where you stand," Nanaba told him. "After everything you've done, turning a village into Titans, killing Mike, attacking us back at the castle, killing Gelger." Nanaba looked down to the ground. "I'm only alive because he pushed me out of the way." "I'm sorry for you loss," Zeke replied. Nanaba cocked her head back up to look at him before throwing a punch at him. Only to be caught by Levi. "I hate this hairy bastard too, but we can knock his teeth out later." Nanaba let out a growled sigh before relenting and letting go. "Never expected you would be the one to hold back," Zeke said to Levi as he dusted himself down. "What were the results of the raid?" Erwin asked. "We suffered 3 causalities and 4 wounded," Heng stated. "Marley, their losses we estimate to be 800 to over 1,000. This is a devastating blow to Marley," Aaron said. "Kiyomi said that at the peak of Marley's strength each Paradise soldier would need to kill 100 Marleyan troops, something I'm sure Marley are more than aware of. We've knocked it out completely." "Are you counting the number of innocent people in that too?" Ed questioned. "One of my students is among those 3. Alphonse added. "They didn't need to die, he didn't need to die. The losses we've faced are a necessary sacrifice if we are going to save Eldia," Zeke interjected. "I understand that this is hard for all of you and that for you, Commander, you would have wanted to avoid this scenario altogether, but it is just as Mrs. Umabito had told you, you're at war but you now have all 3 elements for total victory. Victory is far from assured," Erwin replied. He walked away from the group a few steps. "And we still don't have to fight and send our soldiers out to die again." Erwin turned back to them. "So long as we have 3 of Marley's warriors, they've lost their tactical advantage, and it would be suicide to try. But just how many people are gonna die if Marley tries then?" Alphonse asked. "How many soldier and non-combatants are going to die? How many of the people we know are gonna die if Dash?" Suddenly there was a knock as the metal door screeched open and in stepped Jean, his body slumped over with a somber and cold look on his face. "Lieutenant," Erwin spoke. Jean straightens up but didn't salute them as the look on his face didn't fade. Instead he looked to the others, to Aaron, Ed, Alphonse, and Levi. "Commander Erwin. Captain Levi, 2 kids have infiltrated the ship," he said. "One of them was armed and shot 5 minutes before." Gabby and Falco walked around the deck of the ship, surrounded by what must have been possibly 100 people, both people and the scout regiment. All around people cheered out, laughing and singing as the ship sailed away as Liberio became almost a distance light on the horizon. Gabby looked back, her home now drawing further and further away. She once again gripped the strap of her rifle slung over her shoulder tightly, anxiety taking hold of her body and the unfamiliar feeling of fear began to take root. She gritted her teeth and sighed loudly through her nose, focusing herself. No backing down. No retreat. She turned back to the mass of people on the ship, rage now building inside her heart and mind as she watched them continue to celebrate their victory against Marley and the destruction of her home. Keep calm. Find the card, Titan. Falco grabbed onto her shoulder. We need to think of a way to get back. He whispered to her. We can't stay here. We can't leave. Gabby replied, the enemy has Pike, the card Titan, she also one of Marley's smartest warriors. Gabby began to walk into the crowd with Falco still behind her. Beside, only way we can leave is if we find her. A person began to fire off their gun next to her into the air, the shells falling on the ground as they cheered out into the air, drunk on their confidence and victory. All around enemy soldiers tried to calm them down and stop them from firing their weapons recklessly. Gabby and Falco walked around, trying to blend in with the crowd, as they continued to watch those around them. That's when Gabby noticed it, shifter marks around the eye of an enemy soldier that was just partially healed. A woman who must have been maybe Pike's height, with long black hair done up in a single plait resting on her side. Gabby stopped and then quickly followed the woman. Gabby wait whe Falco was slightly pushed aside as a woman bumped into him dancing with another, losing Gabby in the crowd as she continued to follow the shifter. The female Titan. Annie Leonhardt's Titan. She followed the shifter, almost like a rat to a piper, until she then walked up to another group of soldiers. Then Gabby's heart went from a walk to a sprint, her body shuddered and her breathing stopped. Before her, she saw a familiar face. A woman with brown hair done in a ponytail with a rifle slung over their shoulder as she talked to a shorter woman with red hair and two taller men, one with long straw-colored hair and another with a shaved head of pale hair on a round head. It's you. The one who killed the two gate guards who had shown her kindness. They stood up for an Eldian when Marley soldiers looked down on her. The woman who was involved in the killing of Marley's men and the destruction of her home. It's you. The killer began to talk to the shifter as the others around them laughed with each other. It's you. Before she knew it, she was pulling the rifle down from her side. Her finger was now on the trigger. The shorter woman began to hug the others tightly as she exchanged words with them. They looked to be friends with each other. Gabby pointed her rifle at the killer, her eye looking through the sight as she began to squeeze the trigger. A hail of celebratory gunfire still cried out defiantly. Just before she could fire her shot, the second before she could, the shorter woman turned her head and spotted her. It was like everything had slowed down. The woman placed her hand on the killer's chest as she leaned in forward to push her away as Gabby pulled the trigger. The rifle firing its shot, missing her intended target as it instead struck the chest of the short woman with the red hair, the force of the shot pushing her back as she crashed onto the ground. Everyone around her began to turn to her. The enemy soldiers looked to her with slack jaws and wide eyes as they quickly tried to process what had happened. They looked to the woman she had shot. Petra. The squad leader's been shot. Gabby looked towards her target who was now looking back at her, a look of shock then quickly turning into a look of anger on her face as she pulled the rifle from her side and pointed it at her. Gabby pointed her own rifle back as the two intended to shoot. Suddenly she felt someone slam into her as she pulled the trigger and the killer fired back at him, her bullet grazing against the killer's shoulder as their shot narrowly misses Gabby as she collapsed onto the ground. She looked up to see Falco holding her as a mass of people descended onto them. Sasha clutched at her shoulder, her fingers touching the skin exposed by a cut in her uniform. The child's shot had just barely missed her. In that split second she watched as the two kids were swarmed. Her adrenaline began to lower, dropping off of a cliff as she turned her head back towards Petra. Petra! She yelled as she rushed towards her, Connie, Mina and Jean already at her side as they tried to save her. Someone get the bandages. Jean ordered. He then looked to another, get a stretcher. Yes sir. Two scouts ran back. Stay awake. Mina yelled as she placed her hand over her wound trying to stop the bleeding, blood leaking through her hands and fingers. Petra, say something, please speak to us. Connie pleaded, but she was silent and lifeless as her eyes slowly looking around began to fall still. Quickly 2 scouts ran up to them, one carrying a large roll of bandages as the other lay down a stretcher beside her. Connie and Jean rolled her onto her side gently as the scout tried to wrap the bandage over her chest. Sasha watched frozen and silent, her finger still on the trigger of her rifle. Jean stood up and grabbed his head with his hands as he paced around as both Connie and Mina moved her onto the stretcher. Get her to the medical bay. Mina ordered to the scouts. Connie, you go with her. Yeah, right. Connie said, nodding his hand as he stood up with the scouts pulling up the stretcher. Petra's arm fell off the stretcher's side and dangled out. Connie quickly placed her arm back at her side. What the hell are you trying to do? Someone yelled to their side. Jean, Mina, and Sasha looked back to see Marlowe facing Floch as he held the 2 children on their knees, battered and bruised. Getting rid of the infiltrators. Floch replied, tossing them off this ship. Floch looked down at them. Maybe if they're lucky, their bodies might get washed up back to Marley. You're not doing this, not again. Marlowe told him, we don't kill prisoners, let alone kids. They killed squad leader Ral. Yelled a random person. Toss them overboard. Yelled another. Don't you dare. Mina spoke out. She flicked out the spike in her ring and placed his thumb over it. Everyone stepped back. You wouldn't, Floch replied. Mina pressed her thumb into the spike as a drop of blood dripped out. So being so damn sentimental, it's not like they're dash. Quiet. Mina replied, hand them over. Floch turned to Jean, squad leader, your orders. Jean turned to Floch, squad leader? How can you be so sure squad leader Ral is dead? I'm not. Floch replied, but you can't be either. Jean gritted his teeth, damn it. Mina, escort those 2 to containment. He looked at her before looking back at the crowd. The rest of you, get to the mess hall, there's sleeping bags waiting, you've all been too rowdy. Jean then turned to Sasha. Sasha, you head to the medical bay. I'll tell the others. Sasha nodded her head. She walked back into the ship with the crowd of people. As she walked down the hallway she turned her head down a corridor. The prisoner wing. She started to grip her rifle as the image of that girl armed with a Marley rifle fired at her, and Petra shoving her out of the way. It was her. She thought back to the time she saw her, back in that building as they looked at each other through shattered glass. If she had known then. It was her. Suddenly she felt someone bump into her from behind, knocking her out of her thoughts. She looked behind her to see a child run towards a group of others. She blinked a few times and once more looked down the hallway before then continuing to walk and head to the medical bay. What? Alphonse muttered as they all looked at Jean in paralyzed shock. The shot struck her chest. We don't know if she's going to make it. Jean elaborated. Mina's sent the infiltrators to the cells and Connie and Sasha are with her. Ed stepped forward shaking before he sprinted towards the door, the others following him immediately. Levi stood still and watched them, turning his head towards Erwin, who then nodded his head. Levi quickly jogged away as Jean then followed. All while Aaron stood by with the squad leaders, the commander, and his brother, his head bowed and his long hair covering his face. Ed stormed into the medical bay. There he spotted Sasha, Connie, and Mina standing just by. 2 members of the medical staff worked on someone lying on a bed. Alphonse then followed as he rushed through, then Mikasa, then Armin and then Levi with Jean. All of them rushing towards Petra's bed. When did this happen? Alphonse asked the medical team. Just a couple minutes ago. The staff replied. Few minutes. Why didn't anyone tell us? He questioned, almost yelling. We're sorry, Captain Elric. One staff member said as they continued to operate on Petra. Is there anything you need, anything we can do? Levi asked calmly. Sorry Captain Levi, everything we're doing, is all that can be done. The staff replied. The rifle shot, it's completely tore through her end. Her heart and lungs, they were all hit to some extent before exiting through her. Another replied, she's losing too much blood on top what she has already lost, she doesn't have long. We will make blood then. Alphonse said. Both he and Ed turned to each other. their faces mirroring each other's fear but determination as they quickly scrambled to the long desk full of medical equipment. Iron, carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen. Ed began to list off the elements in blood. Proteins, we need proteins. He called out. Jean and Mina began to run out the room. Iron and carbon, I need dash. Mikasa pulled out a blade from her scarab. Ed turned around and placed his hands onto the end of the blade, transmuting a chunk off. How long do we have? Alphonse asked the medical team as he continued to scratch a transmutation circle in a glass tray. He then turned on a nearby tap and filled it with water. If you can do it, then not long. They replied. Both Mina and Jean ran back with a slab on meat in their hand, handing it to Alphonse as he tossed it into the tray along with the piece of the blade. I can change the metal structure while we're doing it, Alphonse said to Ed, who nodded his head. Have you two made blood before? Armin asked quietly. Neither of the two answered, but Edward swallowed slightly as he heard his question. No. Ed replied, his voice wobbling slightly. But we still have to try. Armin nodded his head as he turned away as they continued to rush around with the different ingredients. Brother, are we as this like last time? Alphonse muttered to Ed, who took in deep breath. He didn't answer, but instead the two placed their hands together. On one. Ed said one. They placed their hands in the tray. A flurry of blue flashes and lights sparkled around their hands as the tray of water turned into a tray of red sludge. The two pulled their hands out of it tray and looked at their result in horror. No, 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 no. Ed muttered, we need new ones. He called to some of the staff. You two, announced a very, very familiar voice. The two looked at each other for a second as if to say, did you hear that? So desperate, even forgetting your limits. The two looked at the red tray of sludge. An eye stared back at them. In that second, time stood still and that moment was stretched on for eternity. Tut, 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 you can't cheat death, you can't cheat me. The tray of sludge began to light up in a bright pale blue light before it swallows itself into nothingness. Everyone watched. The almost in the room looked at them, and the aftermath completely shell-shocked as everything fell silent. What the hell was that? Levi called out to them as they looked back at everyone, struggling to find the words. Captain Levi, said one of the medical staff behind them. They all turned to look back. As one of the doctors lifted a blanket over Petra's body and her head. Squad leader Ral has passed. For just a second all they could do was just staring at the medical team and Petra's body covered in a white blanket. The second after that almost all of them burst into tears, their eyes shut or hands covering their face as if to hide the flood of tears that washed down their cheeks, while others just continued to stare at Petra's now lifeless body on the bed hidden underneath a sheet as the news ran circles in their mind. Both Edward and Jean stood frozen, their lip quivering as the tears began to swell up. Alphonse collapsed sitting on the floor as both he and Mina cried into each other's arms. Armin and Mikasa wept loudly, hoping that she would stand up from the bed. Connie and Sasha both cried into their hands as if trying to hold themselves together. I'm sorry, Sasha kept repeating through her tears, I'm so sorry. Levi stood just by Petra, lifting up the sheet slightly as he took off small metal chest piece covering before placing the sheet back down. I'll see you later, Petra, he muttered. Say hello to the others for me. It was a long and difficult night ride back home. Check the description for the links to the author.